Some ancient places were never truly lost, only forgotten. Beneath forests, deserts, and modern cities, entire structures remained hidden for centuries, while history moved on above them. Many were rediscovered by accident. A collapsed cave, a drought revealing buried walls, or satellite scans exposing shapes beneath the earth. But each discovery created new mysteries instead of answers. Why were some sites abandoned so suddenly? Why do certain chambers appear intentionally sealed? And how many civilizations disappeared before their stories were ever recorded? What survives today is only a small fraction of the ancient world. The rest may still lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting to challenge everything we think we know about the past. In the Taurus Mountains of southwestern Turkey, nearly 1,500 meters above sea level, the ancient city of Sagalassos hides one of the strangest engineering mysteries of the Roman world. Massive marble structures were raised on steep mountain slopes where even modern transport is difficult. Water systems operated under extreme pressure for centuries. Gigantic stone blocks weighing multiple tons were moved through narrow mountain passes without modern machinery. The greatest mystery is simple. How did an ancient civilization build a city of this scale in a place so hostile to construction? Although local villagers always knew ruins existed in the mountains, Sagalassos was scientifically identified in 1824 by British traveller Francis Arundel. Major archaeological excavations later began under Belgian archaeologist Mark Waelkens in the late 20th century, revealing one of the best preserved Roman mountain cities ever found. The greatest mystery surrounding Sagalassos is not its temples or fountains, it is the sheer impossibility of building it. Unlike most major Roman cities, which were constructed near rivers, coastlines, or flat trade routes, Sagalassos was built directly into steep mountain terrain. At nearly 1,500 meters above sea level, winter temperatures could drop below freezing, snowfall was common, and transportation routes were dangerous even by modern standards. Yet the city became one of the wealthiest urban centers of Roman Pisidia. Archaeologists estimate that thousands of tons of limestone and marble were transported uphill to construct theatres, baths, fountains, temples, and civic buildings. Some individual stone blocks weighed over 10 tons. For comparison, that is heavier than a modern African elephant and roughly equivalent to the weight of 2 large pickup trucks combined. The engineering problem becomes even stranger when considering the roads. Roman transport systems relied heavily on wheeled carts, but many ancient mountain routes around Sagalassos have gradients exceeding what heavily loaded Roman wagons could safely climb. Even today, some mountain roads in the region require switchbacks for trucks. This raises a major unanswered question. How exactly were these enormous materials moved? Some researchers believe the Romans may have used advanced pulley systems combined with sledges dragged by animals and workers. Others suggest temporary wooden track systems similar to primitive rail mechanisms may have been installed during major construction phases. However, direct evidence remains limited. The precision of construction makes the logistics even harder to explain. Large staircases and terraces were integrated directly into unstable mountain slopes with remarkable balance. Modern surveys show that many retaining walls were positioned at angles carefully designed to distribute gravitational pressure. In several places, the city appears almost fused into the mountain itself rather than built on top of it. This level of terrain adaptation is extraordinarily rare in the Roman world. The comparison most often made is with Machu Picchu, another mountain city engineered into steep slopes. But Machu Picchu was built by the Inca nearly 1,400 years later. Sagalassos demonstrates that Roman engineers had already solved many of the same structural challenges centuries earlier. The mystery deepens further when climate is considered. Transporting heavy marble uphill in thin mountain air, freezing winters, and unstable terrain would have required enormous labour coordination. Maintaining food supplies alone for thousands of workers would have been a massive logistical operation. And yet the Romans did not merely build a fortress there. They built a luxurious marble city. One of the most astonishing structures in Sagalassos is the Antonine Fountain, which still flows with water today nearly 2,000 years after its construction. The fountain was part of a sophisticated hydraulic network operating across mountainous terrain where water pressure fluctuated dramatically due to elevation changes. This was not a simple gravity-fed system. Researchers discovered evidence suggesting the Romans used pressure management techniques resembling inverted siphon technology. Water likely traveled through ceramic and stone pipelines, capable of handling substantial pressure differences without bursting. That achievement becomes remarkable when considering the environmental conditions. The Taurus Mountains experience earthquakes, seasonal freezing, and shifting soil layers. Modern water systems in seismic regions often require flexible joints and reinforced materials. Yet portions of Sagalassos's ancient infrastructure survived for centuries. Some pipeline joints are so tightly fitted that leakage rates appear extremely low even after nearly 2 millennia of exposure. To understand how advanced this was, consider medieval Europe. Many European cities during the 15th and 16th centuries still struggled with unreliable sanitation and contaminated water distribution. Sagalassos had already developed a pressurized urban water network more than 1,000 years earlier. Modern Turkey sits on one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. Over centuries, countless cities across Anatolia were destroyed by earthquakes. Sagalassos suffered major seismic events as well, particularly during the 6th and 7th centuries. But what surprises researchers is how long many structures remained standing. The reason appears to lie in sophisticated structural planning. Many stone blocks were cut with extraordinary precision, allowing weight to distribute evenly across walls and foundations. Instead of relying purely on mortar, the builders created tightly interlocked systems capable of absorbing limited ground movement. Several foundations were also built in stepped layers following the mountain slope rather than fighting against it. This reduced lateral stress during earthquakes. Modern scans of collapsed structures suggest that some buildings failed gradually rather than catastrophically, indicating surprisingly advanced load distribution for the period. There is still debate over whether Roman engineers in Pisidia developed regional earthquake-resistant adaptations, specifically for mountain construction. If true, it would mean local Roman engineering was more specialized and sophisticated than previously believed. Sagalassos was famous for marble. Unlike many Roman cities where marble was reserved mainly for elite monuments, large portions of Sagalassos were covered in white stone decoration. Temples, fountains, plazas, and civic buildings displayed extensive marble surfaces despite the city's isolated location. That alone creates another engineering mystery. Extracting marble is already difficult. Transporting it uphill into a mountain city is exponentially harder. Archaeologists discovered evidence of large-scale quarrying operations and advanced stone workshops around the city. Some columns exceeded 8 meters in height and were shaped with remarkable symmetry. Even more impressive is the finishing quality. Certain sculptures display details so refined that modern viewers often assume mechanical tools were involved. Facial features, hair textures, and polished surfaces reveal extraordinary craftsmanship using only ancient iron tools, abrasives, and manual labor. Laser analysis of surviving statues has shown surprisingly consistent proportional accuracy across large sculptural works. The precision rivals later Renaissance stonework in some areas. One reason Sagalassos fascinates archaeologists is because the city was not heavily dismantled after abandonment. After earthquakes, plague outbreaks, economic decline, and climate instability during the early Byzantine period, the city gradually emptied. Because of its remote mountain location, later populations did not systematically strip the ruins for building materials the way they did in many ancient cities. As a result, Sagalassos became something rare, a partially frozen archaeological snapshot. Collapsed columns, shattered statues, and fallen walls often remained where they originally crashed nearly 1,400 years ago. For archaeologists, this is invaluable. It allows researchers to reconstruct not only how the city looked, but how its buildings physically failed during earthquakes and abandonment. In many ways, Sagalassos functions like a laboratory for studying ancient engineering under catastrophic conditions. Do you think the engineers of Sagalassos possessed construction techniques far beyond what we normally associate with the ancient Roman world? Or was this simply the result of thousands of workers achieving the impossible through sheer organization and manpower? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A forgotten Maya city hidden in the humid lowlands of Tabasco, Mexico, contains one of the strangest engineering mysteries in the ancient Americas. Comalcalco was built not from giant limestone blocks like most Maya cities, but from millions of fired bricks, a construction method so unusual that some archaeologists once compared it more to ancient Roman engineering than traditional Maya architecture. In a civilization famous for stone pyramids, Comalcalco became the Maya world's impossible brick city. Even stranger, many of its walls still stand after more than 13 centuries inside one of the wettest tropical environments in Mesoamerica. Unlike cities such as Chichen Itza or Tikal, Comalcalco was located in a region with very limited building stone. The surrounding lowlands were dominated by clay-rich soil, rivers, mangroves, and tropical rainforest. Most ancient civilizations facing this problem simply built smaller settlements using wood or packed earth. But the people of Comalcalco attempted something far more ambitious. They industrialized brick production on a massive scale. Archaeologists estimate that some major structures at the site required hundreds of thousands of bricks. Many of these bricks were fired at temperatures between 700 and 900 degrees Celsius, hot enough to dramatically increase hardness and resistance to moisture. Maintaining such temperatures consistently in a humid tropical climate would have required enormous quantities of fuel and carefully controlled firing conditions. Yet the remains of large-scale kiln systems have never been fully identified. That absence has become one of the site's greatest mysteries. The engineering challenge becomes even more impressive when considering the climate itself. Tabasco receives over 2,000 millimeters of rainfall annually, in some regions far more than many famous archaeological zones in Mexico. Modern brick structures in tropical conditions often deteriorate rapidly without chemical sealants or reinforced concrete. But portions of Comalcalco's walls, stairways, and temple platforms have survived for over 1,300 years. Some structural sections still retain remarkably straight alignment, despite centuries of erosion, earthquakes, vegetation growth, and humidity. Part of that durability may come from the city's strange mortar formula. Chemical analysis revealed that the Maya builders mixed crushed oyster shells with lime and organic compounds to create an extremely resilient binding material. This shell-based mortar hardened through a calcium reaction process, somewhat comparable to hydraulic lime systems used in parts of the Roman world. Researchers have pointed out that both civilizations independently discovered ways to create water-resistant building compounds long before modern cement chemistry existed. What makes Comalcalco especially fascinating is that the Maya were never known as a brick-building civilization on this scale. Roman architecture relied heavily on standardized bricks because the empire possessed advanced logistical systems, road networks, and centralized labor organization. The Maya, by contrast, are usually associated with carved limestone monuments shaped by hand. Yet Comalcalco reveals evidence of large-scale material standardization. Thousands of bricks were produced in near-identical dimensions, suggesting organized production methods rather than isolated handmade construction. Even more mysterious are the markings carved into the bricks themselves. Over 4,000 engraved bricks have been documented at the site. Some contain glyph-like symbols, geometric signs, animal figures, handprints, or abstract marks whose meanings remain unknown. A number of archaeologists believe these markings may have functioned like production stamps, identifying work groups, artisans, or construction phases. If true, this would imply a level of labor management rarely associated with Maya cities. Some markings appear almost industrial in nature. Certain bricks carry repetitive symbols arranged in patterns that resemble batch indicators or placement codes. Similar systems appeared in ancient Mesopotamia and Roman construction centuries later, or in entirely different regions of the world. The possibility that the Maya independently developed organized production tracking systems has sparked major debate among researchers studying pre-Columbian engineering. The city's structural design also raises difficult questions. Large brick pyramids face serious load distribution problems because bricks can crack under uneven pressure far more easily than monolithic stone blocks. Modern engineers note that tall brick structures require careful balancing of weight transfer and compression forces. Yet many of Comalcalco's surviving foundations still maintain stable geometry after centuries of partial collapse. This suggests the builders understood how to distribute enormous structural loads through layered brick arrangements and thick mortar cushioning. Another unresolved mystery involves the site's white stucco surfaces. Several temples and sculpted masks were coated in an exceptionally fine lime plaster that reflected sunlight intensely across the tropical landscape. Under sunlight, parts of the city may have appeared almost luminous. Microscopic analysis shows extremely smooth finishing techniques with very fine particle control. Reproducing the same finish today using only ancient tools and materials remains extremely difficult. Some researchers believe the reflective stucco may have also served thermal purposes. White mineral coatings can reduce solar heat absorption, helping structures remain cooler under intense tropical temperatures. If intentional, this would suggest the Maya at Comalcalco possessed sophisticated environmental adaptation knowledge integrated directly into architecture. Trade adds another layer to the mystery. Despite its swampy location, Comalcalco became connected to major Mesoamerican exchange networks. Archaeologists discovered obsidian from central Mexico, jade from Guatemala, marine shell artifacts, and evidence of cacao trade. Transporting these materials across dense wetlands and river systems would have required highly organized logistical routes. Some historians believe Comalcalco functioned as a major commercial gateway between the Maya world and the Gulf Coast. The cacao connection is especially important. Tabasco's climate was ideal for cacao cultivation, one of the most valuable luxury commodities in ancient Mesoamerica. Cacao beans were sometimes used almost like currency among elite trade systems. This economic importance may explain how Comalcalco funded such an enormous architectural experiment despite its difficult environment. Yet perhaps the biggest mystery remains the simplest question of all. Why did they choose fired brick in the first place? Most archaeologists argue that the lack of nearby stone forced the population to innovate. But others point out that the scale and precision of Comalcalco's brick production goes far beyond simple adaptation. Producing millions of bricks required labor coordination, fuel management, temperature control, material standardization, transportation systems, and long-term architectural planning. In many ways, it resembles a technological divergence within the Maya civilization itself, almost as though Comalcalco followed a completely different path of engineering evolution. The city reached its peak between the 6th and 9th centuries AD during the late Classic Maya period, when major urban centers across Mesoamerica were flourishing. Then, like many Maya cities, it declined and was eventually abandoned. The reasons remain uncertain. Environmental pressure, political instability, trade disruption, warfare, or resource exhaustion may all have played roles. But unlike many ruined Maya cities swallowed completely by jungle, Comalcalco left behind something unique, evidence that ancient American engineering may have been far more diverse and experimental than historians once believed. What do you think Comalcalco really was? Simply a clever adaptation to a harsh environment, or evidence of a forgotten engineering breakthrough far ahead of its time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Ancient ruins scattered across the forests of central Cambodia, about 200 kilometers north of Phnom Penh, have survived more than 13 centuries of monsoon rain, flooding, heat, and jungle invasion. Sambor Prei existed long before Angkor Wat and once served as one of the most important cities in Southeast Asia, a massive religious and political capital of the Chenla Kingdom during the 6th and 7th centuries. But the greatest mystery is not its age. It is the technology hidden inside its bricks. Many of these temples were built with joints so tight that almost no mortar can be seen between them, creating structures that survived longer than countless later buildings made with more advanced tools. Even today, archaeologists and material engineers still debate how these ancient builders achieved such precision in one of the harshest climates on Earth. French explorers first documented Sambor Prei in the 19th century during the colonial surveys of Cambodia, but dense jungle concealed much of the city for generations. Large-scale archaeological work expanded during the 20th century, revealing more than 100 temple structures spread across a vast urban landscape. Modern LiDAR scanning later uncovered roads, reservoirs, embankments, and hidden city layouts beneath the forest canopy, proving the settlement was far larger and more technologically organized than researchers once believed. The most astonishing feature of Sambor Prei is its brick construction. At first glance, many temple walls appear almost seamless, as if the bricks were fused together instead of stacked individually. In some sections, the joints between bricks are so thin they resemble machine-cut masonry, rather than handmade construction from the 7th century. This creates a major archaeological puzzle. Ancient Chenla builders did not possess modern steel-cutting equipment, industrial kilns, or chemical cement. Yet many walls display an accuracy comparable to stonework seen in places such as Saxe Huaman or certain Roman imperial structures. Some gaps between bricks measure only a few millimeters. Even more surprising, many surfaces appear polished or blended together after construction, producing the illusion of a single continuous structure. Scientists have proposed several theories to explain this phenomenon. One theory suggests the builders used organic adhesives made from tree resin, plant sap, or sugar compounds mixed with ash and clay. Chemical traces discovered on some Southeast Asian temple bricks indicate the possible use of botanical binders. However, organic compounds normally decay quickly in humid tropical environments, making it difficult to explain how the structures remained stable for over 1,300 years. Another theory proposes that the bricks were partially ground and polished after placement, while still retaining moisture from firing. Experimental archaeology has shown that semi-fired clay bricks can sometimes be smoothed into tighter alignment before reaching full hardness. Yet reproducing the same precision consistently across massive temple walls remains extremely difficult, even for modern reconstruction teams. One of the most controversial hypotheses suggests the temples may have undergone secondary heating after assembly. In this scenario, the walls were exposed to controlled external heat that partially fused the outer brick surfaces together. Similar thermal bonding effects have been observed in some ancient kiln sites, though no conclusive evidence proves this occurred at Sambor Prei. What makes the mystery even more compelling is the survival rate of the bricks themselves. Cambodia's climate is extremely destructive to ancient materials. Average annual rainfall in central Cambodia exceeds 1,400 millimeters, while humidity levels regularly remain above 80%. Under such conditions, ordinary fired clay deteriorates rapidly through water absorption, biological growth, and thermal cracking. Yet many of Sambor Prei-Cook's bricks still retain remarkable hardness and their distinctive reddish-orange coloration. Some structures remain standing despite centuries of root penetration from enormous tropical trees. Engineers studying the material composition discovered that the clay appears unusually refined, with highly controlled particle distribution and firing consistency. Certain bricks may have been fired at temperatures approaching 900 to 1,000 degrees Celsius, significantly hotter than many earlier Southeast Asian constructions. The durability becomes even more extraordinary when compared with later historical buildings. Numerous medieval brick structures across tropical Asia collapsed within a few centuries without constant maintenance. By contrast, sections of Sambor Prei survived wars, monsoon cycles, earthquakes, and biological erosion for over 1,300 years. Some material scientists argue that the Chenla builders may have understood clay selection and thermal treatment at a level far more sophisticated than previously assumed. If true, much of that knowledge may have been lost long before modern historians began studying the region. Another major mystery lies in the city's unusual octagonal temples. Most early religious architecture across Asia relied on square or rectangular layouts because they are structurally easier to stabilize. Circular and polygonal structures require more advanced load distribution and geometric planning. But Sambor Prei contains several enormous octagonal towers among the earliest known examples in Southeast Asia. Constructing octagonal buildings on soft tropical ground presents major engineering challenges. Weight must be distributed evenly across angled walls, and any imbalance can create progressive structural collapse. Even centuries later, many medieval builders avoided large polygonal structures because of these complications. Researchers believe the Chenla architects possessed surprisingly advanced geometric knowledge. Some scholars have suggested they used sophisticated rope measurement systems or modular proportional designs similar to methods later seen in Khmer architecture at Angkor Wat. The mystery becomes even greater because many octagonal towers remained upright despite centuries of flooding and soil movement. Without modern foundations or reinforced concrete, the survival of these structures remains difficult to fully explain. Most ancient civilizations carved decorative reliefs into stone because brick is fragile and prone to cracking. However, many structures at Sambor Prei feature highly detailed ornamental designs, seemingly integrated directly into the brick surfaces themselves. Researchers still debate whether these carvings were made before firing or after construction. If carved before firing, the artisans somehow predicted how much the clay would shrink during heating while preserving precise symmetry. If carved afterward, they managed to avoid large-scale cracking across brittle surfaces, something extremely difficult even with modern tools. The decorative motifs themselves are remarkably sophisticated. Floral spirals, mythical palace imagery, and intricate geometric patterns suggest a mature artistic tradition already existed centuries before the rise of Angkor. Some historians believe Sambor Prei represents the missing technological bridge between early Southeast Asian temple traditions and the later monumental achievements of the Khmer Empire. For decades, researchers believed Sambor Prei was simply a scattered religious complex hidden in the forest. Modern LiDAR technology completely transformed that understanding. Laser scanning revealed extensive urban planning buried beneath vegetation, including road systems, reservoirs, hydraulic embankments, canals, and organized settlement zones extending far beyond the visible temples. This discovery changed the historical timeline of early Cambodian civilization. Large-scale urban planning in the region may have emerged centuries earlier than previously believed. Some archaeologists now argue that Sambor Prei served as an experimental prototype for the hydraulic and urban engineering systems later perfected at Angkor. If true, the technological roots of the Khmer Empire may stretch much deeper into history than scholars once imagined. The city's disappearance is equally mysterious. Historical records from the Chenla period are fragmented and incomplete. No single catastrophe fully explains why such an advanced urban center gradually faded into the jungle. Warfare, trade shifts, environmental stress, or political transformation may all have contributed. But the silence left behind only deepened the mystery. Do you think the Chenla builders truly possessed construction technology far ahead of their time? Or is there still a hidden secret behind Sambor Prei that modern history has yet to uncover? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the dry Casma Valley of northern Peru, more than 300 kilometers north of Lima, archaeologists uncovered something that looked less like a temple and more like a warning carved into stone. Massive walls covered with dismembered human bodies, severed heads, exposed ribs, spinal columns, intestines, and warriors holding clubs stared back from the desert. The site was called Cerro Sechin, and the deeper researchers dug, the stranger it became. The first scientific investigations began in the 1930s, when Peruvian archaeologist Julio C. Tello explored the region and identified the site as one of the oldest monumental complexes in Peru. Later excavations in the 1960s and 70s uncovered dozens of carved monoliths surrounding the structure, along with buried construction phases beneath the visible temple. Each excavation revealed something unexpected. One layer showed earlier adobe architecture hidden underneath later stone walls. Another exposed drainage systems engineered to survive seasonal floods. More recent studies using radiocarbon dating pushed the site's age back to nearly 4,000 years old, placing parts of Cerro Sechin around 1800 to 1500 BCE, older than most major civilizations in the Americas. That timeline alone created controversy. At the time Cerro Sechin was active, the Egyptian New Kingdom had not yet reached its peak. The Assyrian Empire did not exist, and the Olmec civilization in Mesoamerica had not yet emerged. Yet in a relatively isolated Peruvian valley, a society was already constructing large-scale ceremonial architecture with precision-cut volcanic stone and highly organized urban planning. The biggest mystery surrounding Cerro Sechin is not simply its age, but the technical sophistication hidden inside the structure. The outer walls of the temple are lined with hundreds of carved stone slabs made primarily from andesite, a dense volcanic rock significantly harder than limestone. Andesite ranks around 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, meaning it is difficult even for modern steel tools to shape cleanly. Yet the carvings at Cerro Sechin contain deep grooves, curved anatomical details, symmetrical facial proportions, and repeated patterns extending across enormous stone surfaces. The problem is that the Sechin culture supposedly lacked advanced metallurgy. Archaeologists believe most of their tools were made from stone hammer tools, harder minerals, bone implements, and possibly primitive copper. No evidence of iron or steel technology has ever been found at the site. Even today, replicating some of these carvings using only stone tools requires enormous labor and precision. Experimental archaeologists attempting similar carving techniques found that producing a single detailed relief panel using primitive tools could take weeks or even months of continuous work. But Cerro Sechin contains hundreds of them. Even more puzzling is the consistency. Many of the carved blocks appear standardized in size and layout, suggesting centralized planning rather than random artistic decoration. The slabs fit together with remarkable precision, especially considering the civilization had no wheeled transport, no horses, and no known mechanical lifting systems. Some individual stones weigh several tons. Researchers still debate how these blocks were transported across the valley floor and lifted into place with such accuracy. This logistical mystery resembles engineering problems seen thousands of years later at Sacsayhuaman and Pumapunku, where massive stones were moved and aligned with techniques that remain partially unexplained. But Cerro Sechin predates both sites by well over a millennium. Then there are the carvings themselves. Unlike most ancient ceremonial art, the reliefs at Cerro Sechin are disturbingly anatomical. They do not simply depict dead enemies. They show dissected bodies with exposed vertebrae, severed limbs, internal organs, eyeballs connected by optic nerves, and blood flowing from neck wounds. Some figures appear to hold human heads like trophies. Others display what looks almost like surgical precision in the representation of muscles and skeletal structures. This level of anatomical understanding is deeply unusual for such an early civilization. In Europe, detailed anatomical studies would not emerge systematically until thousands of years later. Even many later civilizations represented the human body symbolically rather than biologically. Yet the Sechin carvings show repeated attention to realistic internal structures. Some researchers argue this knowledge came from ritual sacrifice or warfare. Others believe the carvings may represent cosmological symbolism tied to death and agricultural cycles. But there is still no consensus on why the imagery is so graphic or why it appears at such an early stage of Andean civilization. Another mystery involves the function of the complex itself. At first glance, Cerro Sechin resembles a ceremonial temple, but its architectural layout differs from many known Andean sacred centers. The main structure surrounds a sunken central area, enclosed by walls of carved stone. Some archaeologists believe this space may have functioned as a ritual arena where public ceremonies, sacrifices, or displays of political power took place. What makes this theory unsettling is the scale of violence represented in the carvings. If the imagery reflects real events, Cerro Sechin may preserve evidence of organized warfare in the Americas far earlier than historians once believed possible. Traditional models suggested early Andean societies were primarily agricultural and relatively cooperative. Cerro Sechin challenges that narrative completely. The engineering beneath the structure raises even more questions. Peru lies directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. Over the last several thousand years, the region has experienced countless earthquakes, powerful enough to destroy cities. Yet major sections of Cerro Sechin survived. Archaeologists discovered layered construction techniques beneath the temple, including compacted fill materials and carefully distributed stone weight that may have helped absorb seismic shock. Some engineers studying ancient Andean architecture believe the builders intentionally designed the structure to resist earthquakes through flexibility and mass distribution. If true, This would mean the Sechin people understood practical seismic engineering thousands of years before modern structural science formally existed. The site also contains evidence of advanced hydraulic planning. Excavations uncovered drainage channels designed to redirect seasonal water flows away from the structure. This was critical in the Casa Valley, where periodic El Niño climate events could suddenly transform dry terrain into destructive flood zones. Similar water control sophistication appears later at major Andean centers, but Cerro Sechin represents one of the earliest known examples. Then, almost as mysteriously as it appeared, the civilization declined. Around 1500 BCE, major construction activity slowed. Later cultures occupied parts of the valley, but Cerro Sechin gradually lost importance. Some researchers blame environmental instability caused by powerful El Niño cycles. Geological evidence suggests catastrophic flooding may have damaged agricultural systems across the region. Others suspect internal conflict or warfare contributed to the collapse. Do you think Cerro Sechin was simply an ancient ceremonial center, or could it be evidence that some of humanity's earliest civilizations were far more advanced than we ever imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the far north of South Africa, near the borders of Zimbabwe and Botswana, a sandstone hill rises above the dry Limpopo Valley. On its summit once stood Mapungubwe, a forgotten African kingdom that mastered gold with astonishing precision nearly 800 years ago. Long before European ships reached southern Africa, this civilization was already connected to global trade routes stretching from China to the Middle East. But the deeper archaeologists looked, the stranger Mapungubwe became. The site was officially rediscovered in 1932 by local farmer and explorer Van Graan, after stories of a hidden hill filled with ancient treasures circulated through the region. Archaeologist Leo Fouché later led the first formal excavations. What they uncovered would permanently change African archaeology. At first glance, Mapungubwe does not resemble famous ancient capitals like Machu Picchu or Petra. There are no gigantic temples or colossal statues. Yet beneath its relatively modest ruins was evidence of something many historians once believed impossible in southern Africa during the 13th century: a highly stratified kingdom with advanced metallurgy, international trade, centralized political authority, and engineering knowledge sophisticated enough to sustain thousands of people in an unforgiving environment. The first major mystery is the hill itself. Mapungubwe Hill rises roughly 30 meters above the surrounding plain, with steep natural sandstone cliffs acting almost like defensive walls. Archaeologists discovered that the ruling elite lived on the summit while commoners lived below, one of the earliest clear examples of class-based spatial separation in sub-Saharan Africa. That alone was historically shocking, but the logistics behind it are even more difficult to explain. The Limpopo Valley is semi-arid. Summer temperatures often exceed 35 degrees Celsius, and rainfall is unpredictable. Maintaining a permanent elite settlement on top of a rocky hill would have required organized food storage, controlled access to water, labor coordination, and political stability. Estimates suggest the wider Mapungubwe population may have reached between 5,000 and 10,000 people during its peak around AD 1220-1290. Supporting a population of that scale in such an environment would have been an immense engineering challenge. Yet archaeologists still have not found infrastructure proportional to the kingdom's apparent complexity. There is no massive reservoir system comparable to Roman cisterns, no extensive irrigation canals like those of Mesopotamia, no monumental hydraulic network like the Maya. The kingdom clearly functioned, but many of the systems that sustained it remain archaeologically invisible. And then there is the gold. The most famous artifact from Mapungubwe is the Golden Rhinoceros of Mapungubwe, a small ceremonial sculpture created around the 13th century. At first glance, it appears simple, but under closer examination, it becomes one of the most technically unsettling artifacts ever discovered in southern African archaeology. The rhinoceros was constructed using extremely thin sheets of hammered gold wrapped around a carved wooden core. To create it, artisans had to understand mining, smelting, hammering, shaping, cutting, and joining delicate metallic surfaces without tearing them apart. Even modern metalworkers acknowledge how difficult it is to consistently produce ultra-thin gold foil without advanced temperature control and highly refined techniques. Some of the gold sheets recovered at Mapungubwe are thinner than 1 millimeter. Producing material at that level requires remarkable control over force distribution during hammering. Too much pressure fractures the metal. Too little accomplishes nothing. Ancient craftsmen somehow mastered the balance. The deeper mystery is that the archaeological evidence for the industrial process behind this craftsmanship is surprisingly limited. Researchers have discovered furnaces, crucibles, slag, ironworking debris, and traces of metallurgical activity across the region. But the scale of surviving infrastructure does not seem to match the sophistication of the finished gold objects. Unlike ancient Egypt, where massive mining and smelting operations left behind extensive industrial scars, Mapungubwe's metallurgical footprint appears comparatively subtle. That creates a difficult question. How did a kingdom with relatively limited visible industrial infrastructure achieve such precision in gold production? Some researchers believe Mapungubwe's metallurgists may have used highly specialized small-scale furnaces capable of reaching temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius. Experimental archaeology has shown that charcoal-fired furnaces using forced air bellows can theoretically achieve these temperatures, but maintaining stable heat long enough to refine gold efficiently requires deep practical knowledge of airflow, fuel density, ore composition, and thermal behavior. This becomes even more impressive when compared to contemporary Europe. In many rural parts of 13th century Europe, goldsmithing was still concentrated among small elite workshops with limited precision tools. Yet, artisans in Mapungubwe were producing ceremonial gold objects with astonishing symmetry and delicate structural control in a region once incorrectly assumed to be technologically isolated. The gold itself also raises unresolved questions. Large quantities of gold artifacts have been recovered from elite burials, including bracelets, beads, scepters, and animal sculptures. This suggests access to a major supply network, yet no nearby gold source alone fully explains the kingdom's apparent wealth. Some archaeologists suspect Mapungubwe controlled trade corridors linking inland goldfields with the Swahili coast, turning the kingdom into a strategic redistribution center for precious metals moving toward Indian Ocean markets. And this leads directly into another mystery: global trade. Excavations at Mapungubwe uncovered glass beads from Persia, Chinese celadon pottery from the Song dynasty, imported ceramics, and other luxury goods originating thousands of kilometers away. These were not isolated curiosities. They were part of a functioning international exchange system. For imported Chinese ceramics to reach Mapungubwe in the 13th century, goods would have needed to travel across the Indian Ocean to East African trading ports, then move inland through a vast network of merchants, caravans, political alliances, and controlled trade routes. That implies organizational sophistication on a scale historians once denied existed in southern Africa before colonial contact. Mapungubwe was not isolated. It was connected to the medieval world economy. Its elites likely accumulated power by controlling cattle, ivory, gold, and long-distance commerce. Cattle were especially important. In many African societies, cattle represented wealth, status, and political authority. Archaeological evidence suggests Mapungubwe's rulers managed enormous herds despite environmental limitations. Maintaining such herds in a drought-prone region would have required advanced seasonal planning and territorial control. Then, almost suddenly, the kingdom disappeared. By around AD 1300, Mapungubwe was abandoned. There is no evidence of catastrophic warfare on the scale seen at sites destroyed by invasion, no signs of massive fire destruction, no confirmed epidemic. Instead, the kingdom appears to have declined quietly. Climate change is one major theory. Paleoclimate studies indicate southern Africa experienced increasing aridity during the late 13th century. Reduced rainfall could have destabilized agriculture and weakened cattle-based wealth systems. Another theory suggests trade routes gradually shifted northward toward the emerging power of Great Zimbabwe, which later became the dominant political center in the region. But neither explanation fully resolves the mystery. Civilizations usually leave transitional phases behind evidence of migration, adaptation, or gradual restructuring. Mapungubwe instead seems to fade with unusual silence. A kingdom sophisticated enough to produce advanced gold artifacts and participate in intercontinental trade somehow vanished while leaving behind surprisingly little explanation for how it truly functioned. What do you think was the true source of Mapungubwe's advanced gold technology, lost engineering knowledge, hidden trade networks, or something historians still haven't fully uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Located in the volcanic highlands of Puebla, Mexico, Cantona was once one of the largest cities in ancient Mesoamerica. At its peak between roughly 600 and 900 CE, the city may have held more than 90,000 inhabitants across nearly 12 square kilometers of hardened lava fields. But Cantona was unlike any other ancient metropolis. It had no massive imperial inscriptions, no famous kings carved into stone, and almost no written records explaining who truly controlled it. Instead, it left behind something far stranger: endless defensive walls, more than 24 ritual ball courts, and evidence of an industrial obsidian economy capable of producing blades sharper than modern surgical steel. Even today, archaeologists still debate how a civilization built on jagged volcanic rock developed engineering systems sophisticated enough to survive earthquakes, control trade routes, and manufacture precision cutting tools with astonishing microscopic sharpness. Although local communities had known about the ruins for centuries, serious archaeological investigation of Cantona only accelerated during the 20th century, particularly through the work of Mexican archaeologist Angel Garcia Cook in the 1970s and 1980s. What researchers discovered shocked them. Beneath layers of volcanic terrain was an enormous urban complex containing over 500 streets and pathways, nearly 3,000 residential patios, dozens of pyramidal structures, fortified entrances, and one of the largest concentrations of Mesoamerican bull courts ever found. Unlike Teotihuacan, whose giant avenues were built on flattened terrain, Cantona adapted directly to uneven lava flows created by ancient volcanic eruptions. Rather than reshaping nature, its builders engineered the city around it. From above, Cantona resembles a military labyrinth more than a ceremonial capital. The city's rise also coincided with the decline of Teotihuacan around the 7th century CE, leading some historians to believe Cantona may have emerged as a strategic commercial power during one of the most unstable periods in ancient central Mexico. One of the first mysteries surrounding Cantona is how its architecture survived for more than 1,000 years despite being built without mortar. The city was constructed primarily using dry stone masonry, a technique where stones are stacked with extraordinary precision rather than glued together with cement or lime. Similar methods later appeared in Inca sites such as Sacsayhuaman in Peru, but Cantona developed its own version centuries earlier. The volcanic basalt stones used in the city were irregular, sharp, and extremely difficult to shape. Yet many walls still stand today despite centuries of erosion and repeated seismic activity in central Mexico. Modern engineers studying ancient dry stone systems have noted something surprising. Structures without rigid mortar can sometimes absorb earthquake vibrations better than cemented walls, because the stones shift microscopically instead of cracking catastrophically. This raises an important question. Did Cantona's builders intentionally understand seismic flexibility? Some retaining walls in Cantona were constructed on sloped volcanic surfaces at angles that distributed weight unusually efficiently. Archaeologists also found evidence that many roads and terraces were designed to follow natural stress lines in the terrain rather than cutting across them. For a city built on fractured lava fields, this level of structural adaptation was remarkably advanced. Cantona does not feel like a traditional ceremonial city. Its streets are narrow, confusing, and heavily compartmentalized. Large walls divide neighborhoods into isolated sectors connected through controlled entrances and elevated pathways. Visibility is intentionally limited. From a military perspective, this design is brilliant. Invaders entering the city would have struggled to move quickly through its maze-like corridors. Defensive choke points appear throughout the urban layout, allowing small groups to control movement between districts. Some researchers believe Cantona was engineered during an era of constant regional warfare after the collapse of larger Mesoamerican powers. Instead of building a symbolic capital like Teotihuacan, Cantona may have functioned more like a fortified economic stronghold. Even its estimated 27 to 40 ball courts may have served political purposes beyond ritual sports. In Mesoamerican culture, the ball game was tied to religion, diplomacy, and conflict resolution. The unusually high number of courts suggests Cantona may have been politically fragmented into competing factions or clans, each requiring its own ceremonial arena. No one knows for certain, but the city's entire urban layout suggests social control, defense, and economic management were prioritized with extraordinary precision. This is the mystery that transformed Cantona from an archaeological site into one of the most fascinating technological enigmas in ancient America. Cantona sat near major obsidian sources, volcanic glass formed when lava cools rapidly without crystal growth. To ancient civilizations, obsidian was more valuable than ordinary stone because it could be fractured into edges sharper than metal blades. Even under modern microscopes, obsidian blades can produce cutting edges only a few nanometers thick. Some experimental studies have shown that obsidian scalpels can be sharper than stainless steel surgical scalpels used in hospitals today. At Cantona, archaeologists uncovered massive evidence of industrial-scale obsidian production, including workshops, unfinished blades, stone cores, hammer tools, and enormous fields of obsidian debris. The scale suggests the city controlled one of the most powerful obsidian economies in central Mexico, but the real mystery lies in the craftsmanship. Producing a high-quality obsidian blade requires understanding conchoidal fracture mechanics, the same curved fracture physics seen in glass breaking. A single incorrect strike can ruin the entire piece. Yet many blades from Cantona show extreme symmetry, razor-thin edges, and highly controlled pressure flaking techniques. Some obsidian points were so refined that modern experimental archaeologists required years of practice to reproduce them consistently. This becomes even more astonishing, considering the tools available at the time. Cantona's craftsmen had no steel instruments, no powered cutting systems, and no microscopes. Everything was accomplished through hand pressure, stone tools, bone implements, and learned precision. Some specialists compare the process less to primitive stoneworking and more to advanced material engineering. Obsidian itself is also extremely fragile. Unlike metal, it can shatter unpredictably. Managing large-scale production without catastrophic material loss would have required highly specialized labor systems and deep generational knowledge. Trade routes connected Cantona's obsidian industry across large parts of Mesoamerica. Researchers believe obsidian from this region traveled hundreds of kilometers through commercial networks, reaching multiple cultures. In many ways, Cantona's power may not have come from armies or kings. It may have come from controlling the sharpest material technology in the ancient Americas. Another mystery is how Cantona sustained such a large population in an environment with limited natural water access. The city lacked a major river. Instead, archaeologists found evidence of rainwater collection systems, reservoirs, drainage channels, and carefully angled plazas designed to redirect runoff. This was critical because volcanic terrain absorbs water rapidly through cracks and porous rock layers. Cantona's engineers appear to have compensated by designing artificial hydraulic control systems capable of storing seasonal rainfall. Some reservoirs were strategically placed at higher elevations to distribute water downward through gravity. For a city potentially housing tens of thousands of people, this required careful planning far beyond simple survival techniques. Without effective water management, Cantona could never have supported its population or its obsidian industry. Around 900 to 1050 CE, Cantona began to decline. The reasons remain uncertain. There is little evidence of a massive invasion or catastrophic destruction. Instead, the city appears to have been gradually abandoned. Possible explanations include prolonged drought, collapse of obsidian trade networks, political fragmentation, resource exhaustion, or shifting regional power structures. But none fully explain why such a strategically engineered city disappeared so completely. What do you think really caused the fall of Cantona? Was it climate collapse, war, the loss of obsidian trade, or something we still haven't discovered yet? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In northern Greece, near the ancient banks of the Strymon River, lies Amphipolis, a burial complex so massive, precise, and technologically advanced that many archaeologists still struggle to explain how it was built over 2,300 years ago. Its greatest mystery is not simply who was buried there, but why a civilization from the age of Alexander the Great possessed engineering and artistic capabilities that appear centuries ahead of their time. The site was first investigated in the 19th century, but the massive Castor tomb only began revealing its secrets after systematic excavations led by archaeologist Katerina Peristeri in 2012. In 2014, the world watched as hidden chambers, giant sphinxes, marble sculptures, and one of the most sophisticated mosaics ever discovered in the ancient Greek world emerged from beneath the earth. The first shock of Amphipolis is its size. The Castor mound measures nearly 158 meters in diameter, surrounded by a circular marble wall almost 497 meters long, making it the largest funerary monument ever discovered in Greece. The retaining wall alone required thousands of tons of marble imported from the island of Thasos across the Aegean Sea. Even today, transporting material on that scale through mountainous terrain would require major logistical coordination, yet the builders achieved this sometime around 325 to 300 BCE, only decades after Alexander's death. To understand how extraordinary this is, compare it to the Royal Macedonian tombs at Vergina. Most elite tombs of the period were relatively compact underground chambers, while Amphipolis resembles a state-level engineering project more comparable to imperial Roman complexes constructed centuries later. Archaeologists estimate that moving the marble blocks alone would have required hundreds of workers, coordinated river transport systems, animal-powered hauling operations, and highly advanced surveying techniques. Nothing about this monument suggests a simple regional burial site. Everything about it suggests political power operating on an enormous scale. One of the least discussed but most fascinating mysteries of Amphipolis is where it was built. The site stands near the Strymon River basin, an area dominated by soft alluvial soil. Modern engineers know that constructing massive stone structures on this kind of terrain is extremely dangerous because uneven settling gradually destroys foundations over time. Yet Amphipolis survived more than 23 centuries despite earthquakes, erosion, flooding, and changing groundwater conditions. Excavations revealed layered foundation systems composed of compacted sand, limestone fill, and carefully distributed stone platforms designed to spread weight evenly across unstable ground. Some structural engineers have compared the concept to primitive floating foundation systems used in modern architecture. What makes this remarkable is the period itself. Sophisticated soil mechanics are normally associated with far later Roman engineering traditions. Yet Amphipolis demonstrates that Macedonian builders already understood how to stabilize enormous loads on weak terrain generations earlier. Even more mysterious is the precision of the circular perimeter wall. Creating a near-perfect circular enclosure almost 500 meters long without modern instruments would have required extremely advanced measurement techniques. Minor geometric errors would have become catastrophic across such a large radius, yet the structure maintains extraordinary symmetry. This level of surveying accuracy is often compared to sites like Machu Picchu or Sacsayhuaman, where ancient builders achieved astonishing geometric precision under extremely difficult environmental conditions. When archaeologists entered the tomb, they discovered something strange. The chambers had been intentionally filled with enormous quantities of sand. At first, many believed the sand was simply debris caused by collapse or flooding, but analysis showed the fill had been deliberately placed because the distribution was too controlled and too consistent to be natural. This discovery created a major debate among researchers. One theory suggests the sand functioned as protection against grave robbers, while another proposes something far more advanced, that the fill acted as a primitive shock absorption system designed to stabilize the chambers during seismic activity. If true, this would represent an early form of anti-earthquake engineering. The chambers themselves were protected by thick limestone ceiling walls capable of redistributing structural pressure, and combined with the sand fill, the design may have helped prevent catastrophic collapse during centuries of regional earthquakes. Modern earthquake-resistant architecture often relies on energy dissipation and controlled force distribution, yet Amphipolis appears to apply similar principles more than 2,000 years earlier. Even the entrance guardians raise questions. Two massive sphinxes once stood at the main doorway, carved with remarkable symmetry and anatomical accuracy. Their scale suggests not only artistic mastery but also the ability to move and position multi-ton sculptures inside confined architectural spaces without damaging surrounding structures. Inside the second chamber stand two marble caryatids female sculptures nearly 2 meters tall. At first glance they appear decorative, similar to those seen in classical Greek temples, but closer analysis suggests they may also have served structural functions. Their stance, arm positioning, and alignment correspond closely with stress points in the chamber architecture. Some engineers believe the sculptures were intentionally integrated into the load distribution system of the ceiling above them. This combination of aesthetics and structural mechanics was extremely rare in ancient architecture, and demonstrates a level of design integration closer to Renaissance engineering philosophies than typical Hellenistic tomb. Construction. The carvings themselves are astonishingly detailed. Folds in the garments remain visible after more than 2 millennia, while traces of original pigment, indicate the sculptures were once brightly painted. Advanced pigment analysis has revealed mineral compounds capable of maintaining color stability far longer than expected in humid underground environments. But the greatest technological mystery inside Amphipolis is undoubtedly the mosaic floor. The artwork depicts Hades abducting Persephone while Hermes guides the chariot forward. At nearly 4.5 meters wide, the composition is one of the most sophisticated mosaics ever discovered from the Hellenistic world. The technical execution is what stunned experts. The mosaic uses millions of tiny pebbles and stone fragments, arranged with such precision that the scene achieves depth, shadow, motion, and anatomical realism rarely seen in works from this era. Some sections create subtle gradient transitions resembling modern digital shading techniques. The horses appear to move through space, muscles are modeled through gradual tonal variation, and fabric folds create realistic light diffusion. The illusion of motion is so advanced that several art historians compared it to Roman imperial mosaics produced more than 100 years later. This creates a chronological problem. Either the artistic capabilities of late 4th century BCE Macedonia were far more advanced than previously believed, or Amphipolis represents an isolated technological leap far ahead of surrounding cultures. Even more mysterious is the durability of the materials. The color contrast remains surprisingly stable despite centuries underground, and laboratory analysis suggests careful selection of mineral-rich stones resistant to moisture degradation and chemical erosion. Some restorers believe the builders intentionally selected stone types based not only on color, but also on long-term oxidation behavior, a level of material understanding implying highly specialized knowledge. The geometric accuracy of the mosaic is equally extraordinary. The circular border patterns maintain near-perfect symmetry across large distances despite being assembled entirely by hand. Errors smaller than a few millimeters would have disrupted the visual balance, yet the composition remains remarkably consistent. For many experts, the Amphipolis mosaic is not merely a work of art. It is evidence of technical knowledge that does not fit comfortably within conventional assumptions about the capabilities of the ancient Macedonian world. So who do you think was truly buried inside Amphipolis, a forgotten royal figure, Hephaestion, or someone even more important than history remembers? Share your theory in the comments below. On a windswept plateau nearly 1,000 meters above sea level in northern Spain, a small Celtiberian city once forced the Roman Republic into one of the longest and most humiliating wars in its history. Numantia was not protected by giant pyramids or impossible megaliths. Its greatest mystery was something far more dangerous, a level of military engineering, logistics, and metallurgy that seemed completely out of proportion for an Iron Age tribal settlement. For almost 20 years, Rome could not break it. The ruins of Numantia were identified in the 19th century after years of debate over its true location. Systematic excavations began in 1905 under German archaeologist Adolf Scholten, whose work uncovered defensive walls, streets, weapons, storage pits, and traces of one of the largest Roman siege operations ever attempted against a single city. To understand why Numantia became legendary, the scale of Rome must be understood first. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome had already defeated Carthage, conquered much of the Mediterranean, and fielded professional armies capable of engineering roads, bridges, siege towers, and massive fortifications across entire continents. Roman military discipline was so effective that most tribal settlements collapsed rapidly once surrounded, yet Numantia resisted for nearly 2 decades. Ancient Roman sources describe repeated Roman defeats, failed assaults, destroyed supply lines, and commanders humiliated by a settlement that may have contained only 4,000 to 8,000 inhabitants. Some estimates place the defending force at barely 2,000 warriors during certain periods of the conflict. That imbalance is staggering. Modern comparisons help reveal how unusual this was. It would be similar to a small, isolated mountain town repeatedly defeating offensives from the strongest military power on Earth. Rome eventually became so frustrated that it sent Scipio Aemilianus, the same commander who destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE, specifically to end the Numantine resistance once and for all. Even then, he avoided direct assault. That decision alone reveals how dangerous Numantia had become. Unlike famous ancient cities surrounded by gigantic stone walls, Numantia relied heavily on terrain optimization. The city stood on elevated ground between river valleys near the upper Duero basin. Archaeological studies show that its fortifications were integrated directly into the natural topography. Instead of relying on monument-sized walls, the defenders created narrow access corridors, steep approach angles, and layered defensive positions that forced attackers into exposed kill zones. This type of terrain warfare resembles much later military principles used in medieval hill forts and even modern mountain defense systems. Excavations revealed strategically positioned walls following slope geometry, controlled entry points, elevated observation lines, and defensive structures adapted to natural cliffs and ravines. What makes this mysterious is the sophistication of the planning. The Celtiberians were traditionally described by Roman writers as loosely organized tribal groups, yet Numantia demonstrates an advanced understanding of defensive architecture and battlefield control. Some archaeologists compare aspects of the site to Gallic hill fort engineering, but Numantia appears unusually optimized for long-term resistance. Its builders understood something critical. A fortress does not need massive walls if the landscape itself becomes the weapon. When Scipio arrived around 134 BCE, he abandoned the standard Roman approach of direct attack. Instead, he launched one of the most ambitious siege operations of the ancient world. Roman forces constructed multiple military camps, ditches, towers, wooden barriers, fortified walls, and river blockades. The encirclement stretched roughly 9 kilometers around the city. Some historians estimate the Roman force may have exceeded 50,000 soldiers and auxiliaries during parts of the campaign. That means Rome used an army potentially larger than the entire population of Numantia itself. But the real mystery is not the Roman siege. It is how Numantia survived it. Archaeological evidence suggests the inhabitants endured conditions that should have caused collapse much earlier. Excavations uncovered underground storage pits, grain reserves, and organized urban layouts suggesting highly efficient rationing systems. Researchers still debate several unresolved questions. Did Numantia possess hidden supply tunnels? Were there concealed external trade routes? Did the city develop advanced food preservation methods? How did such a small population manage resources so effectively under total isolation? Some storage structures discovered at the site indicate careful temperature control using underground chambers. Similar systems appear in other Iron Age settlements, but Numantia's apparent endurance suggests logistics far beyond what Rome expected. This transforms the story from simple warfare into something deeper, a battle of engineering, endurance, and systems management. One reason Rome struggled was because the Numantians refused to fight conventionally. Roman armies excelled in organized battlefield formations. Their strength depended on discipline, formation cohesion, and large-scale logistics. The defenders of Numantia attacked those exact weaknesses. Historical accounts describe ambush tactics, rapid raids, night attacks, supply disruption, hit-and-run warfare, and terrain manipulation. These tactics resemble modern asymmetric warfare more than traditional ancient battles. Instead of confronting Roman legions head-on, the Celtiberians forced Rome into a prolonged war of exhaustion. Some military historians argue that Numantia demonstrated an advanced understanding of strategic attrition centuries before such concepts became formalized in military theory. This is one of the most overlooked mysteries surrounding the city. Numantia may represent evidence that Iron Age tribal societies possessed far more sophisticated military intelligence than Roman sources admitted. Among all the mysteries surrounding Numantia, the most technically fascinating may be its metallurgy. Roman armies eventually adopted weapons inspired by Iberian blades. The famous Gladius Hispaniensis, one of Rome's deadliest swords, was influenced heavily by Hispano-Celtic designs developed in Iberia. This is extraordinary. Rome, the dominant military power of the ancient world, was copying weapon technology from the very people it considered barbarians. Archaeometallurgical studies suggest Celtiberian smiths achieved surprisingly high-quality steel production for the period. Analyses of surviving blades from Iberian regions reveal strong carbon distribution, flexible yet durable structures, advanced forging consistency, and an excellent balance between hardness and elasticity. In practical terms, this meant the swords could absorb impact without shattering while maintaining sharp cutting edges. That balance is extremely difficult to achieve without careful heat control. The mystery is how Celtiberian blacksmiths managed it. Iron production in the 2nd century BCE normally suffered from inconsistent furnace temperatures and impurities. Yet some Iberian weapons demonstrate metallurgical qualities far ahead of expectations for decentralized tribal societies. Several theories attempt to explain this. Unusually rich local ore deposits, inherited metallurgical traditions from earlier Mediterranean trade networks, multi-stage forging techniques, and advanced quenching and tempering methods. But no complete consensus exists. Experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate Celtiberian blades discovered that producing similar flexibility requires remarkably precise temperature management. Even small errors during forging can ruin the metal structure completely. Some reconstructed Iberian swords performed so effectively in tests that researchers compared them favorably against early Roman weapon designs. This creates an uncomfortable historical question. If Celtiberian metallurgy was this advanced, how much ancient technological knowledge has been underestimated simply because it belonged to cultures outside the major empires? Numantia may not have possessed giant monuments, but it may have possessed something even more dangerous: industrial knowledge capable of rivaling Rome itself. After months of complete encirclement, starvation finally overwhelmed Numantia in 133 BCE. Ancient accounts claim many inhabitants chose death over surrender, with some reportedly burning their possessions and parts of the city rather than becoming Roman slaves. Archaeological evidence confirms intense destruction layers across the settlement, but even here, mysteries remain. Excavations suggest multiple burn phases instead of a single fire, implying the city may have endured repeated destruction and rapid reconstruction throughout the war. Some surviving structures also reveal mixed wood and stone construction techniques that may have improved flexibility and shock absorption during attacks. Once again, Numantia appears far more technically advanced than expected for an Iron Age tribal settlement. Do you think Numantia was simply a small tribal city, or proof that ancient civilizations possessed technologies and military knowledge far beyond what history admits? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The desert plains of Bahrain hide one of the strangest landscapes on Earth. More than 170,000 burial mounds rise from the sand like frozen waves, stretching for kilometers in every direction. No giant temples, no massive palaces, just an endless sea of tombs built by a civilization that vanished nearly 4,000 years ago. The greatest mystery is not simply why the people of Dilmun built so many graves, but how a relatively small Bronze Age society managed to engineer and preserve one of the largest necropolises in human history under one of the harshest climates on the planet. The site known today as Dilmun Burial Mounds dates mainly between approximately 2,200 and 1,750 BCE. During the height of the Dilmun civilization, ancient Mesopotamian texts describe Dilmun as a wealthy trading kingdom positioned between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley civilization. Sumerian records even referred to it as a paradise-like land, connected to purity and the afterlife. But unlike Egypt, where wealth was immortalized through pyramids and temples, Dilmun invested enormous resources into burial architecture spread across the landscape itself. From the air, the scale becomes almost unbelievable. Archaeologists estimate that at its peak, the necropolis covered more than 30 square kilometers. Some mound fields are so dense that individual tombs nearly touch each other. To put that into perspective, the total number of mounds in Bahrain is greater than the combined number of burial tumuli known from many ancient Mediterranean civilizations. Even more surprising is the consistency of their design. Most mounds follow an extremely standardized layout. A central stone chamber covered by layers of compacted earth and gravel, forming a circular hill ranging from 2 to 15 meters in diameter. Such uniformity suggests a level of organized labor and engineering control rarely associated with Gulf societies of the Bronze Age. The engineering problem becomes far more impressive when the environment is considered. Bahrain's desert climate experiences extreme heat, salt-heavy soil, seasonal humidity, and constant erosion from wind. Modern geologists note that exposed earthen structures in similar conditions deteriorate rapidly unless carefully stabilized. Yet thousands of Dilmun mounds have survived for nearly 4 millennia. Excavations revealed that the builders did not simply pile sand over the dead. The layers were carefully compacted using different densities of gravel and soil, almost functioning like primitive geotechnical engineering. Some larger mounds even contain circular retaining walls made from limestone blocks designed to redistribute pressure and prevent collapse. This becomes especially mysterious in the so-called royal mounds, near Ali burial mounds. These structures are vastly larger than ordinary tombs, with some exceeding 50 meters in diameter and rising more than 12 meters high. Several contain multiple chambers connected by narrow passageways. Archaeologists discovered evidence of plaster coating on internal walls, as well as ventilation-like gaps that may have helped reduce humidity inside the burial chambers. The structural challenge here is enormous. Creating large hollow spaces beneath tons of compressed earth without causing cave-ins would have required a sophisticated understanding of weight distribution, even if learned purely through experimentation. Modern engineers comparing these structures to ancient Mediterranean tombs have noted similarities with corbelling techniques later used in Mycenaean Greece. However, Dilmun's builders achieved stability using simpler materials and without the massive stone vault systems seen elsewhere. Some researchers argue that the people of Dilmun may have developed localized engineering knowledge specifically adapted to Bahrain's soft desert terrain. Others believe generations of trial and error slowly refined construction methods over centuries. One of the greatest unanswered questions involves logistics. Bahrain is not rich in large natural stone formations, meaning much of the limestone used for chamber construction likely had to be transported from other parts of the island. Even a modest mound could require several tons of material. Multiplied across more than 170,000 tombs, the total amount of earth and stone moved becomes staggering. Conservative estimates suggest millions of tons of material were relocated over the lifetime of the necropolis. Without wheeled transport systems comparable to later civilizations, archaeologists still debate how such an operation was sustained for centuries. Some theories suggest labor teams may have used sled-like dragging systems combined with temporary earthen ramps. Others propose that seasonal moisture in the soil may have reduced friction during transport, but no direct evidence for these systems has yet been found. What makes the mystery deeper is that the construction appears highly organized rather than improvised. The mounds are often arranged in clusters with remarkably consistent spacing. Satellite analysis has shown that many smaller mounds surround larger central tombs in patterns resembling hierarchical urban planning. This has led some scholars to believe the necropolis reflected a rigid social structure, where burial placement symbolized status and lineage. The wealth buried inside several tombs also reveals Dilmun's extraordinary international connections. Excavations uncovered carnelian beads traced to the Indus Valley, Mesopotamian pottery, copper from Oman, and shell artifacts from distant coastal regions. Chemical analysis of certain materials confirms trade routes extending over 1,000 kilometers across sea and desert. At a time when most societies remained regionally isolated, Dilmun operated as a maritime trade hub linking some of the world's earliest urban civilizations. Yet this creates another paradox. If Dilmun controlled such valuable trade networks, why did it invest so heavily in burial architecture instead of constructing monumental cities like Babylon or Memphis? Some archaeologists believe the burial landscape itself functioned as a political statement. The endless fields of tombs may have represented ancestral authority, territorial control, or spiritual legitimacy. In this interpretation, the necropolis was not separate from society, it was the center of society. Another strange detail is the apparent long-term continuity of construction. Evidence suggests the mounds were built continuously for hundreds of years, with relatively little deviation in architectural style. This level of cultural stability is unusual in ancient history, where wars, invasions, and dynastic changes often radically altered construction traditions. Bahrain, however, appears to have maintained a remarkably consistent funerary system over generations. Even the material selection raises questions. Geological studies indicate that builders deliberately chose limestone with lower porosity than surrounding rock, reducing salt absorption and improving resistance to thermal cracking. This may sound simple today, but identifying suitable stone types without modern testing implies extensive empirical knowledge of material behavior under desert conditions. Perhaps the most haunting mystery is how Dilmun disappeared. By the late 2nd millennium BCE, the civilization declined as trade routes shifted and regional powers expanded. But unlike many ancient societies, Dilmun did not leave behind colossal ruins destroyed by conquest or fire. Instead, it left behind silence and an ocean of graves stretching across the desert. What do you think the Dilmun burial mounds were truly built for simple burial grounds, symbols of power, or something far more mysterious? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Termessos is located high in the Taurus Mountains of southern Turkey, more than 1,000 meters above sea level inside what is now Guluk Mountain National Park. Unlike most ancient Mediterranean cities built near rivers, ports, or fertile plains, Termessos was constructed directly into steep mountain terrain, surrounded by cliffs and narrow passes. The city remained largely isolated for centuries, which helped preserve many of its structures almost untouched. European travelers documented the ruins during the 19th century, but systematic archaeological work accelerated during the 20th century. Each expedition revealed something new: massive defensive walls fused with natural rock formations, enormous underground cisterns carved into stone, earthquake-resistant public buildings, intricate drainage systems, and one of the highest ancient theatres ever constructed in Anatolia. Recent surveys using aerial mapping and geological analysis have shown that large portions of the city were engineered directly around fault lines and unstable slopes, something that should have made large-scale urban construction extremely dangerous. Yet much of Termessos still stands after more than 2,000 years. That is where the real mystery begins. The greatest mystery surrounding Termessos is not who built it. It is how they built it at all. The city sits between roughly 1,000 and 1,200 meters in elevation. Even modern mountain construction requires heavy machinery, stabilized roads, cranes, and constant transport infrastructure. Yet the people of Termessos managed to create an entire urban center in terrain where simply walking is difficult. Archaeologists estimate that some retaining walls and fortifications contain stone blocks weighing several tons each. Moving material uphill through narrow mountain paths would have required enormous manpower and logistical coordination. Unlike places such as Petra, where many structures were carved directly into softer sandstone, Termessos relied heavily on transported limestone blocks assembled on uneven mountain slopes. This creates a major engineering problem. A modern construction crew facing the same terrain would normally cut large access roads into the mountain before transporting material, but many of the ancient access paths at Termessos are too narrow even for animal caravans carrying massive loads. Some historians believe temporary wooden ramps and pulley systems were used. Others suggest that much of the stone was quarried locally from the mountain itself. But even that explanation does not solve the deeper issue: constructing stable foundations on fractured, sloped rock at high altitude. The city should have suffered catastrophic collapses. Instead, many structures remained standing for centuries. In 333 BCE, Alexander the Great advanced through Anatolia during his campaign against the Persian Empire. Historical accounts describe how he approached Termessos, but ultimately abandoned the assault. That decision alone transformed the city into legend. Ancient sources describe Termessos as nearly impregnable, but the mystery is not simply that it had walls. Many ancient cities had walls. The mystery is how the builders merged military engineering with the mountain itself. Instead of relying entirely on artificial fortifications, the city's defenses exploited gravity, elevation, bottlenecks, and natural cliffs. Certain approach routes forced invaders into extremely narrow passages where defenders positioned above could attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Modern military historians comparing ancient defensive systems often mention similarities between Termessos and medieval mountain fortresses built more than 1,000 years later. That raises an uncomfortable question. How did a mountain city in the Hellenistic world develop defensive concepts so advanced that even Alexander, whose army destroyed cities across 3 continents, considered the cost too high? Some sections of the walls also show evidence of highly sophisticated stone fitting. While not as precise as the polygonal masonry at Sacsayhuaman, the builders clearly understood how to distribute structural pressure along uneven terrain. The city was not simply built on a mountain, it was engineered as part of the mountain. No mystery at Termessos confuses researchers more than water. Mountain settlements face a fundamental survival problem: maintaining stable water supplies through dry seasons. Yet Termessos supported thousands of inhabitants for generations despite lacking a major river. Archaeologists discovered numerous cisterns throughout the city, including underground reservoirs, rainwater collection systems, stone channels, and massive carved storage chambers. Some reservoirs were lined with waterproof plaster that survived more than 2,000 years despite temperature fluctuations, seismic activity, and erosion. Chemical studies of similar ancient hydraulic mortars across the Mediterranean show that certain mixtures contained volcanic ash, lime, and mineral additives capable of creating long-term water resistance comparable to some modern concretes. But Termessos presents an additional complication. The city's altitude exposes it to seasonal freeze-thaw cycles. Water entering cracks should have expanded during cold periods, gradually destroying the reservoirs from within. Yet many remained functional long after the city declined. Researchers still debate whether the builders developed specialized waterproof mixtures adapted specifically for mountain conditions. Others believe the placement of the reservoirs themselves was the real technological achievement, strategically integrated into bedrock zones less vulnerable to stress fractures. Whatever the answer, the water systems at Termessos suggest an advanced understanding of hydrology far beyond what many people associate with ancient mountain settlements. Southern Turkey sits near major tectonic zones. Earthquakes have destroyed entire cities throughout Anatolian history, and yet parts of Termessos survived remarkably well. The theatre is one of the clearest examples. Built directly into the mountainside, it overlooks the valley below from an elevation that feels almost impossible. The seating rows curve with extraordinary precision, despite being anchored into uneven terrain. Modern structural engineers studying ancient theatres have noted that curved seating arrangements naturally distribute force more effectively during seismic stress. In other words, some ancient architectural forms accidentally behaved like primitive earthquake-resistant designs. But at Termessos, the situation appears more deliberate. Drainage channels were cut directly into the terrain to prevent water accumulation beneath foundations. Retaining walls were layered against natural rock instead of fully replacing it. In several locations, builders avoided fighting the mountain and instead shaped the city around geological weaknesses. This is one reason why many structures partially collapsed rather than completely failing. The city absorbed stress instead of resisting it rigidly. That principle is still used in modern earthquake engineering today. The necropolis of Termessos contains massive sarcophagi scattered across dangerous slopes and elevated ridges. Some weigh several tons and were positioned in places that remain difficult to access even now. Their transportation remains one of the site's most overlooked mysteries. Modern archaeologists using terrain analysis have pointed out that certain tombs sit in areas where large wheeled transport would have been nearly impossible. Moving stone blocks uphill across fractured limestone without modern roads would have required sophisticated coordination systems involving ropes, rollers, wooden sledges, and large labor forces. What makes the mystery more striking is the precision of the carving. Many sarcophagi display detailed relief work and carefully balanced proportions despite being transported through terrain capable of damaging even unfinished stone. Some historians compare the logistical challenge to moving sections of the stones used at Machu Picchu, except here the terrain involves steep Mediterranean mountain ridges instead of broad Andean terraces. The deeper researchers study the necropolis, the more the city begins to resemble an industrial-scale engineering operation hidden inside the mountains. Do you think Termessos was simply an extraordinary mountain city, or evidence that some ancient civilizations understood engineering far beyond what we usually imagine? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Within the Sonoran Desert of southern Arizona, about 80 kilometers south of modern-day Phoenix, stands the massive 4-story structure of Casa Grande ruins, a building that should not have survived. Rising from one of the harshest desert environments in North America, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius and seasonal floods can erase entire settlements, the structure has endured for more than 700 years. No steel, no concrete, no wheeled transport, no draft animals. just compacted desert soil engineered so effectively that parts of the building have outlasted many medieval stone structures from Europe. Even today, archaeologists still debate how the Hohokam civilization managed to construct and maintain such a technologically advanced settlement in the middle of an unforgiving desert landscape. The first documented European encounter with Casa Grande came in 1694, when Jesuit missionary Father Eusebio Kino traveled through the region and described a great house abandoned among the desert plains. Serious archaeological investigation did not begin until the late 19th century. In 1892, archaeologist Frank Hamilton Cushing conducted one of the earliest scientific studies of the site and discovered extensive irrigation canals surrounding the ruins. Later excavations throughout the 1900s revealed platform mounds, ball courts, residential compounds, shell jewelry from the Gulf of California, copper bells likely imported from Mesoamerica, and evidence of a massive regional canal network. Every excavation expanded the mystery. Casa Grande was not an isolated structure. It was part of an enormous, engineered desert civilization. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Casa Grande is the material itself. The structure was built primarily from caliche, a hardened natural cement made from desert soil rich in calcium carbonate. Modern engineers know caliche is notoriously difficult to work with because it cracks under thermal stress and erodes rapidly under moisture exposure. Yet the walls of Casa Grande, some more than 1 meter thick, remained stable for centuries despite extreme temperature fluctuations between day and night. Researchers studying the internal composition found that the Hohokam did not simply pile mud together. The material appears carefully layered and compacted in stages, almost like primitive poured concrete. Some archaeologists estimate the Great House required thousands of tons of material moved and shaped entirely by human labor. The engineering challenge becomes even more astonishing when considering the environment. The Sonoran Desert experiences temperature swings capable of destroying weak earthen architecture within decades. Many adobe settlements from later centuries across the American Southwest deteriorated rapidly without constant repair. Casa Grande survived more than 7 centuries. In modern materials science, thermal mass construction is considered one of the most efficient passive cooling systems ever developed. Thick walls absorb heat during the day and slowly release it at night, stabilizing interior temperatures. Casa Grande appears to exploit this principle with remarkable sophistication long before thermodynamics existed as a scientific discipline. Some researchers argue that the Hohokam may have developed construction knowledge through centuries of experimentation, eventually creating one of the most durable adobe structures ever built in North America. Inside the structure, archaeologists discovered strategically placed windows and ventilation openings that continue to puzzle researchers. Some openings appear positioned specifically to channel airflow through the building during seasonal wind changes. Others align with solar positions during solstices and equinoxes. During certain times of year, sunlight passes through narrow openings and illuminates specific interior walls with surprising precision. This has led some researchers to propose that Casa Grande functioned partly as an astronomical observatory. Similar solar alignments are found in ancient structures such as Chaco Canyon and Machu Picchu, where architecture was linked directly to celestial cycles. What makes the Casa Grande alignments controversial is the level of accuracy involved. To calculate solar positions across multiple seasons without modern instruments would require decades of systematic observation. The Earth's axial tilt changes the sunrise position throughout the year, meaning even small construction errors could ruin the alignment. Some archaeologists argue the alignments may be coincidental because portions of the building have collapsed over time. Others counter that there are too many consistent alignments for chance alone to explain them. If intentional, the Hohokam possessed an advanced understanding of solar movement comparable to far larger ancient civilizations. Some researchers also believe these alignments may have served agricultural purposes. In a desert society dependent on irrigation, accurately tracking seasonal changes could determine planting schedules and water distribution cycles. If true, Casa Grande may have functioned as both a ceremonial and scientific structure simultaneously. But the most extraordinary achievement of the Hohokam civilization was not the great house itself. It was water. Casa Grande existed in a region where annual rainfall averages less than 30 centimeters. Agriculture on a large scale should have been nearly impossible. Yet excavations revealed one of the largest pre-industrial irrigation systems ever discovered in North America. The Hohokam constructed hundreds of kilometers of canals, some over 20 meters wide and several meters deep, stretching across the desert floor with astonishing precision. Modern hydraulic engineers studying these canals found something deeply surprising. The slope gradients were carefully controlled to maintain stable water flow. If the canals were too steep, erosion would destroy them. If too shallow, water would stagnate. Maintaining a functional gradient over tens of kilometers without laser surveying equipment or metal tools is extraordinarily difficult even by modern standards. Some canal segments deviated by only a few centimeters per kilometer. This level of precision suggests sophisticated surveying methods archaeologists still do not fully understand. Satellite imagery and aerial mapping later revealed that the canal system connected multiple Hohokam settlements into a vast agricultural network. Some researchers estimate the system irrigated tens of thousands of acres of farmland. Crops such as maize, beans, squash, and cotton supported a large regional population centuries before European arrival. The scale rivals irrigation achievements seen in ancient Mesopotamia and parts of the Nile Valley despite being developed independently in the deserts of North America. Archaeological discoveries also revealed evidence of long-distance trade. Marine shells from the Pacific coast, macaw feathers from Mesoamerica, and copper artifacts suggest the Hohokam participated in a trade network spanning hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. This challenges the outdated assumption that prehistoric North American societies were technologically isolated or primitive. Casa Grande may have been a major regional center connected to wider cultural systems across the southwest and northern Mexico. Some artifacts discovered near the site resemble objects found in Mesoamerican civilizations, leading researchers to debate whether cultural exchange influenced Hohokam engineering and astronomy. The discovery of bull courts near Hohokam settlements strengthened these theories. Similar structures were common in ancient Mesoamerican societies, where ritual ball games held political and religious significance. Although direct connections remain debated, the similarities suggest Casa Grande existed within a far more interconnected ancient world than previously believed. Yet perhaps the greatest mystery is how everything collapsed. Around the 15th century, the Hohokam settlements surrounding Casa Grande were abandoned. There is little evidence of catastrophic warfare. No mass graves, no burn destruction layers large enough to indicate sudden invasion. Climate studies using tree ring data suggest the region experienced prolonged droughts during the late medieval period, including mega droughts capable of devastating agricultural systems. But drought alone may not explain the near-total disappearance of such a sophisticated engineered society. Some researchers believe the irrigation network itself became too complex to maintain. Large canal systems require enormous labor coordination. Sediment buildup, flooding, or minor infrastructure failures can trigger cascading collapse across entire agricultural regions. Once the system destabilized, food production may have failed rapidly. Others suggest social fragmentation, resource exhaustion, or changing trade patterns weaken the civilization over generations. What do you think really caused the collapse of the Hohokam civilization climate disaster? The failure of their massive canal system, or something we still haven't discovered yet? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Located near modern-day Amman, Jordan, Ain Ghazal does not look like the birthplace of advanced engineering. There are no giant pyramids, no massive stone temples, and no metal machines buried beneath the earth. Yet hidden under this Neolithic settlement was evidence of something deeply unsettling. A society from nearly 9,000 years ago producing life-size statues using high-temperature chemical technology, centuries before such processes were supposed to exist. Long before bronze metallurgy, before writing, and before the wheel became widespread, the people of Ain Ghazal were already manipulating materials with a level of control that still raises questions today. The site was discovered in 1974 during road construction near Amman, and major excavations were later led by archaeologist Gary Rollifson. At first, Ain Ghazal appeared to be another early farming settlement from the pre-pottery Neolithic period. But as excavations expanded, archaeologists realized they had uncovered one of the largest Neolithic population centers ever found in the Near East, occupied between roughly 7,200 and 6,500 BCE. What emerged from the ground would completely reshape assumptions about prehistoric technology. The greatest mystery of Ain Ghazal is not the statues themselves, it is the technology required to create them. More than 30 human-like statues and busts were discovered buried in carefully prepared pits beneath the settlement. Some were nearly 1 meter tall. Their faces were smooth and symmetrical. Their eyes were made from black bitumen. Their bodies were formed over bundles of reeds and then coated with thick layers of lime plaster. Even today, after roughly 9,000 years, many still retain recognizable facial structures. The problem is the material. The plaster used at Ain Ghazal was not simple mud or clay. It was lime plaster produced through controlled thermal transformation. To create it, limestone had to be heated to temperatures between roughly 700 and 900 degrees Celsius. At these temperatures, calcium carbonate breaks down into quicklime through a chemical reaction known as calcination, and the quicklime is then mixed with water to create workable plaster. That sounds simple on paper, but in reality it is an extremely demanding industrial process. Even small mistakes in temperature control can ruin the material. If the heat is too low, calcination fails. If the heat is too high, the material becomes unusable. Producing stable lime plaster requires sustained heating over many hours, possibly days, with carefully controlled airflow and enormous amounts of fuel. This is what makes Ain Ghazal so difficult to explain. The settlement existed thousands of years before the rise of civilizations normally associated with large-scale pyrotechnology. In many parts of Europe during the same period, humans were still living in relatively small farming communities with limited specialization. Yet at Ain Ghazal, people were already operating what was essentially an early chemical industry. Archaeologists estimate that producing plaster for a single large statue may have required burning several times its own weight in wood. Considering the number of statues discovered, the settlement would have consumed massive quantities of timber in a region that was never heavily forested to begin with. Some researchers now believe Ain Ghazal may represent one of the earliest known examples of environmental strain caused by technological production. But fuel consumption is only part of the mystery. No large industrial kilns from the site have ever been conclusively identified. Researchers still debate how these temperatures were achieved so consistently. Some theories suggest underground firing pits, while others propose dome-shaped firing structures capable of trapping heat efficiently. Yet none fully explain the scale of production or the uniformity of the final material. Even more puzzling is the quality itself. Microscopic analysis shows that the plaster was often finely processed and surprisingly homogeneous. In some samples, the particle structure resembles advanced lime plasters used thousands of years later in Mediterranean civilizations. The surfaces were smooth, durable, and capable of preserving detail across millennia. In practical terms, the people of Ain Ghazal were mastering heat chemistry before metalworking had even become widespread. The statues themselves introduce another technological mystery. Rather than carving stone, the builders created an internal framework of bundled reeds tied together into rough human forms. Multiple layers of wet plaster were then applied over the structure. The technique is remarkably similar to modern composite construction methods, where lightweight internal support materials are combined with hardened external shells. The engineering challenge here is enormous. Large plaster structures naturally crack as they dry because moisture escapes unevenly. Without proper layering and thickness control, entire sections collapse under their own weight. Yet many Ain Ghazal statues survive not only the drying process, but nearly 9,000 years underground. Some statues even had two heads, while others displayed elongated faces, oversized eyes, or proportions that appear intentionally unnatural. Their eyes, formed using black bitumen imported from distant regions, create an unsettling appearance, unlike almost any other prehistoric sculpture discovered from this era. What is most surprising is the consistency. The symmetry of the faces suggests careful planning rather than random artistic experimentation. Researchers studying the statues have noted repeated proportions and recurring structural patterns, implying that their creators may have followed standardized production techniques or ritual design systems. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. These statues may not have been isolated works of art, but products of a specialized technological tradition. At its peak, Ain Ghazal may have supported between 2,000 and 3,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest known Neolithic settlements in the world. For comparison, many farming villages from the same period contained only a few hundred people at most. Some estimates suggest Ain Ghazal rivaled or even exceeded parts of ancient Jericho during certain phases. Maintaining such a population required far more than agriculture alone. The settlement needed organized food storage, labor coordination, water access, construction planning, and social systems sophisticated enough to prevent collapse. Houses were built using stone foundations and plastered floors that were periodically repaired and resurfaced. Some floors were so smooth and level that archaeologists initially mistook them for much later constructions. This level of maintenance implies long-term planning and collective labor organization on a scale rarely associated with societies this old. In effect, Ain Ghazal behaved less like a primitive village and more like an early proto-urban society emerging thousands of years before cities were supposed to exist. One of the least discussed but most technically fascinating aspects of Ain Ghazal is its flooring technology. Many structures contain bright white lime-plastered floors with highly polished surfaces. These floors were not temporary, and some were repaired multiple times across generations. Creating such surfaces required crushing limestone into fine powder, heating it under controlled conditions, carefully balancing water ratios, spreading the material evenly, and polishing it before full curing. The process resembles techniques later perfected by Roman engineers thousands of years afterward. What makes this mysterious is not simply that the technology existed, but that it appeared so suddenly. Archaeologists still debate whether the knowledge evolved locally or emerged from a wider exchange network spreading across the Levant during the Neolithic Revolution. Either possibility suggests a level of technical communication and experimentation far beyond what was once imagined for prehistoric societies. Around 6,500 BCE, Ain Ghazal began to decline. Evidence suggests the surrounding environment suffered from severe deforestation and soil degradation. Pollen analysis indicates major changes in vegetation patterns, while erosion deposits hint at ecological instability. The same technological system that allowed the settlement to flourish may have slowly destroyed the resources it depended on, and that may be the most disturbing part of the story. Do you think Ain Ghazal was simply an advanced Neolithic settlement, or evidence that ancient humans understood technology far earlier than we ever imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the deserts of southeastern Iran, near the border of Afghanistan, lie the ruins of Shahr-i Sokhta, a 5,000-year-old city where archaeologists uncovered what may be the world's first artificial eye, evidence of brain surgery, and technology centuries ahead of its time. The site was first noted by British explorer Oral Stein in the early 20th century, but systematic excavations began in 1967 under Italian archaeologist Maurizio Tosi. What initially looked like another Bronze Age ruin soon revealed something very different. An enormous urban centre filled with medical anomalies, advanced craftsmanship, and engineering capabilities that still challenge archaeologists today. Among all discoveries at Shahr-i Sokhta, nothing shocked researchers more than the skeleton of a woman buried around 2800 BCE with an artificial eyeball still inside her skull. The prosthetic eye measured roughly 2.5 centimeters in diameter and was made from a lightweight material likely composed of natural bitumen mixed with animal fat. What made it extraordinary was the outer surface. It had been coated with an ultra-thin layer of gold, engraved with tiny radiating lines designed to imitate the capillaries of a real human eye. Under microscopic examination, researchers discovered two tiny holes drilled into the sides of the object. These holes likely held threads used to secure the eye inside the socket while the woman was alive. Marks found around the eye socket suggest repeated contact over a long period of time, meaning this was not a funerary decoration inserted after death. She actually wore it. That detail changes everything. At the time this woman lived, most civilizations were still struggling with early urban organization. Yet here, in a desert city thousands of kilometers away from Egypt's Great Pyramids, someone had developed a functional cosmetic prosthetic, requiring knowledge of anatomy, materials engineering, precision drilling, and surface finishing. Even more mysterious is the gold coating itself. Producing such a uniform metallic layer on a curved object without modern plating techniques would have been extremely difficult. The layer was only microns thick, thinner than a human hair. Some researchers compare the precision to elite Mesopotamian jewelry workshops, yet Shahr-i Sokhta was geographically isolated compared to the major imperial centers of the Bronze Age. The unanswered question is terrifyingly simple. How advanced was their medical knowledge really? Because once a civilization understands prosthetics, it implies something larger: specialized craftsmen, surgical knowledge, social demand for restorative medicine, and possibly an organized medical tradition. Most Bronze Age societies left behind weapons, pottery, or temples. Shahr-i Sokhta left behind evidence that humans were attempting to repair the body itself. Another burial at the site revealed the skull of a teenage girl suffering from hydrocephalus, a condition where fluid accumulates inside the brain. What archaeologists found on the skull was astonishing. A section of cranial bone had been deliberately removed in what appears to be a surgical procedure known as trepanation. More importantly, the surrounding bone showed signs of healing. This means the girl survived the operation for months afterward. That survival is the real mystery. Trepanation is known from several ancient cultures, but survival rates in prehistoric surgery were usually extremely low due to infection and trauma. Yet at Shahr-i Sokhta, the procedure appears controlled and intentional. The opening was carefully shaped rather than violently fractured, suggesting the surgeons understood exactly how much bone to remove without immediately killing the patient. To put this into perspective, even in parts of medieval Europe, more than 3,000 years later, cranial surgery still carried catastrophic mortality rates. Yet this Bronze Age community managed to perform a delicate skull operation in the middle of an arid desert civilization. Some researchers believe they may have understood pressure relief inside the skull at a surprisingly advanced level. Others argue it could have been ritualistic, but the survival evidence makes the purely ritual explanation harder to defend, because rituals do not usually produce medically successful outcomes. One of the most famous artifacts from Shahr-i Sokhta is a simple clay goblet decorated with 5 sequential images of a goat jumping upward to eat leaves from a tree. Individually, the drawings seem ordinary, but when the cup is rotated rapidly, the goat appears to move. It is effectively a primitive animation device created around 5,000 years ago. This matters because animation depends on understanding sequential motion and persistence of vision, the same optical principle used in modern cinema. Most ancient art captures static scenes. This artifact captures time itself. The spacing between each image is remarkably deliberate. The goat bends, jumps, stretches upward, and reaches the branch in a sequence almost identical to modern frame-by-frame animation logic. Some historians call it coincidence. Others believe it represents one of the earliest known attempts by humans to simulate motion visually. Either explanation is extraordinary, because it suggests the people of Shahr-i Sokhta were not merely recording the world around them, they were experimenting with perception itself. At its peak, Shahr-i Sokhta covered more than 150 hectares, making it one of the largest settlements in the region during the Bronze Age. The city contained residential districts, industrial workshops, burial zones, administrative areas, water systems, pottery kilns, and metallurgy workshops. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of large-scale craft production, including bead drilling, textile manufacturing, and advanced ceramic firing. Thousands of artifacts indicate trade connections stretching from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley civilization. And that creates another mystery. How did such a massive city survive in one of the harshest environments in the region? Temperatures in the area can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, while rainfall remains extremely limited throughout the year. Sustaining a large urban population would have required precise control of water resources. Researchers believe the inhabitants relied on branches of the Helmand River combined with canal systems, but the full hydraulic network has never been completely reconstructed. Some scholars estimate the population may have reached tens of thousands at its height. Maintaining food, sanitation, and industrial production for a population of that size in a desert environment would have required organizational complexity comparable to much later civilizations. In many ways, Shahr-i Sokhta looks less like an isolated settlement and more like an experimental urban civilization that appeared centuries too early. The craftsmanship discovered at the site continues to puzzle specialists today. Archaeologists found beads drilled through hard stones like lapis lazuli and carnelian, extremely thin woven textiles, precision pottery, copper alloys, and miniature decorative inlays. Some stone beads contain holes so narrow and symmetrical that researchers still debate how they were manufactured efficiently using Bronze Age tools. Copper drills alone should not have been strong enough to produce such consistent perforations in extremely hard minerals. Experimental archaeologists suggest they may have used quartz sand abrasives combined with bow drills rotating at high speed. But even modern reconstructions struggle to replicate the precision on a large scale. This is a recurring pattern at Shahr-i Sokhta. The technology should exist, but not at this level. Then, suddenly, everything disappeared. around 1800 BCE, Shahr-i Sokhta was abandoned. Multiple burn layers were discovered across the site, giving rise to the name the Burnt City. But to this day, no one knows exactly what caused the collapse. Theories include river diversion, climate change, desertification, trade collapse, and repeated massive fires. What makes the mystery even stranger is that the city did not appear to decline slowly like many other ancient civilizations. Instead, it seems to have vanished from history almost abruptly. And that may be the most haunting part of Shahr-i Sokhta. It does not look like a primitive settlement, but the remains of an ancient technological branch that developed far beyond its time. What do you think really happened to Shahr-i Sokhta? Was it destroyed by nature, war, or did an advanced civilization simply vanish from history? Let me know your theory in the comments below. Near the eastern shore of Lake Victoria in western Kenya stands Thimlich Ohinga, a massive stone fortress built without cement, without steel, and without modern engineering. Some walls rise over 4 meters high and have survived centuries of rain, erosion, and ground movement. The greatest mystery is not who built it, but how these dry stone walls still refuse to collapse. Amen. Local communities had known about Thimlich Ohinga for generations, but the site entered formal archaeological study during the 20th century under British colonial surveys in Kenya. Major academic investigations expanded in the 1980s and 1990s, eventually revealing that the structure was not a single enclosure, but part of a vast network of stone settlements spread across the Lake Victoria region. At first glance, Thimlich Ohinga resembles a smaller African version of Great Zimbabwe. The walls are made entirely from stacked stones without mortar, concrete, or metal reinforcement. Some sections exceed 4 meters in height and more than 1 meter in thickness. What makes this extraordinary is the environment itself. Western Kenya experiences intense seasonal rainfall, fluctuating temperatures, soil movement, and erosion. Modern unreinforced walls exposed to similar conditions often crack within decades, yet parts of Thimlich Ohinga have remained standing for several centuries. Archaeologists estimate that constructing the complex required moving thousands of stones, many weighing over 100 kilograms. Unlike Roman engineers, the builders left behind no written plans, no inscriptions, and no evidence of advanced metal tools. Everything appears to have been accomplished through pure understanding of gravity, pressure, and stone balance. The site covers several thousand square meters and includes multiple defensive rings, livestock enclosures, narrow corridors, and internal habitation zones. This was not a primitive pile of rocks. It was a carefully engineered defensive system. This is the question that fascinates engineers the most. Unlike modern walls that rely on cement to hold materials together, Thimlich Ohinga depends entirely on structural geometry. The builders used a technique now recognized in engineering as dry stone interlocking. Every stone transfers pressure into neighboring stones, distributing weight across the entire structure instead of concentrating stress at one point. The walls are not perfectly vertical. Many lean slightly inward, a technique similar to battered walls used in ancient fortifications across the Mediterranean. This inward angle lowers the center of gravity and allows the wall to resist outward collapse. More importantly, most walls are curved rather than straight. Curved walls distribute force more efficiently, exactly like arches and domes in Roman engineering. Modern structural studies show that curved dry stone walls can absorb vibration and shifting pressure significantly better than flat walls. This raises an uncomfortable question for historians. How did a society with no formal mathematics or written engineering manuals discover principles that modern structural engineers still use today? Even more puzzling is the wall flexibility. Because no mortar locks the stones rigidly together, the structure can slightly shift during ground movement instead of cracking catastrophically. This is remarkably similar to the earthquake-resistant stonework of Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman, where stones move minimally during seismic activity and then settle back into place. Several geological surveys around Lake Victoria indicate periodic soil expansion and contraction caused by seasonal moisture cycles. A rigid structure would eventually fracture under these conditions, yet the flexible architecture of Thimlich Ohinga may actually have allowed it to survive longer than early cement-based construction. Some researchers argue that the builders learned these techniques through centuries of experimentation. But there is a major problem with this explanation. Archaeologists still cannot find the intermediate stages showing how the engineering evolved. The technology appears surprisingly mature from the moment it enters the archaeological record. One of the strangest aspects of Thimlich Ohinga is what lies beneath the walls, almost nothing. Modern structures of similar mass typically require deep foundations to prevent sinking and collapse. But many sections of Thimlich Ohinga were built directly onto stable bedrock or compacted ground with minimal excavation. The builders appear to have understood local geology extremely well. Large stones were placed at the bottom to distribute weight broadly, while smaller stones filled gaps and locked the structure together. This created a semi-flexible wall capable of absorbing stress instead of resisting it rigidly. Today, dry stone engineering experts sometimes describe this principle as controlled movement. Ironically, some modern concrete systems fail precisely because they are too rigid. The same principle appears in ancient Andean construction, thousands of kilometers away in South America, yet there is no evidence of contact between these civilizations. Two completely separate cultures may have independently discovered the same structural solution to environmental stress. Thimlich Ohinga was not simply a village, it was a fortress optimized for survival. The entrances are unusually narrow, often allowing only one person to pass at a time. Attackers entering the structure would be forced into confined pathways where defenders held the advantage. Many corridors curve sharply, limiting visibility and slowing movement. From above, the layout resembles layered defensive rings similar to later military fortifications. The central enclosure likely protected livestock, one of the most valuable resources in the region. In many East African societies, cattle represented wealth, survival, and social status. Protecting them was equivalent to protecting an entire economy. Researchers believe the walls also helped defend against predators such as hyenas and lions, which were far more common in the region centuries ago. This means the fortress was engineered to resist both human and environmental threats simultaneously. Perhaps the most underestimated mystery is logistics. Even if the engineering principles are understood, moving the stones remains difficult to explain. Some rocks likely originated from sources outside the immediate construction zone. Transporting thousands of heavy stones across uneven terrain without wheeled vehicles would have required enormous coordination. Experimental archaeology suggests that moving a single 200-kilogram stone using ropes and wooden rollers could require multiple workers. Multiply that by thousands of stones, and the labor demands become staggering. This mirrors ancient construction mysteries seen at Baalbek and Pumapunku sites, where the greatest puzzle is often not carving the stones, but transporting them. The final mystery may be the strangest of all. Why did this engineering tradition disappear? Many ancient technologies evolve into later architectural systems. Roman arches influenced Europe for centuries. Inca masonry techniques survived in modified forms long after the Spanish conquest, but large-scale dry stone fortress construction around Lake Victoria declined dramatically. Something interrupted the transmission of this knowledge. Conflict, migration, political change, or environmental shifts may have caused the engineering tradition to fade. What remains today is a silent structure of stone, one that still challenges assumptions about what small ancient societies were capable of achieving, without modern tools, mathematics, or written science. What do you think caused the incredible construction technology of Thimlich Ohinga to disappear from history? Was it war? Environmental change? Or is there still another hidden secret waiting to be discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Northern Oman's harsh mountain landscape, near the ancient oasis settlements of Bat, Al-Kut, and Al-Ain, became the focus of international archaeology in the 1970s, when Danish survey teams documented strange circular stone structures scattered across the desert terrain. Early excavations revealed dozens of tombs unlike anything previously known in Arabia. During later excavations in the 1980s and 90s, archaeologists uncovered multi-chambered tomb towers, copper artifacts, imported pottery from Mesopotamia, and evidence of long-distance trade networks stretching thousands of kilometers across the Bronze Age world. More recent studies using satellite mapping and drone surveys revealed that the necropolis was far larger than originally believed, with hundreds of tombs spread across the landscape, many positioned with surprising geometric consistency. But the deeper archaeologists looked, the stranger Bat became. The first mystery begins with the tomb towers themselves. Many of these structures were built more than 4,000 years ago during the Nar period, roughly between 3000 and 2000 BCE. Each tomb was constructed using carefully stacked limestone blocks fitted together without mortar. Some towers originally stood more than 6 meters tall and measured up to 12 meters in diameter. What shocked engineers was not simply their size, but their survival. Oman experiences brutal environmental conditions, with summer temperatures frequently exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, powerful desert winds, and severe thermal expansion between day and night. Modern concrete structures in similar conditions often crack within decades, yet many Bat tombs remain standing after 4 millennia. The precision of the stonework created even bigger questions. The builders shaped and positioned thousands of heavy limestone blocks into symmetrical circular forms with remarkable consistency. Unlike the pyramids of Giza necropolis, Bat's towers were not built in a fertile river valley with massive labor resources. They stood in isolated mountain terrain with limited timber, limited water, and almost no evidence of advanced transport systems. Even moving several-ton stone blocks through the rocky valleys of Oman today would require modern machinery or carefully engineered lifting systems. Archaeologists still debate how Bronze Age communities achieved this on such a large scale. Some tombs show evidence of corbelled internal chambers, where each layer of stone slightly overlaps the one below it to gradually create a stable roof structure. This technique distributes pressure outward rather than directly downward, a principle later perfected in Roman vaults and domes thousands of years afterward. Structural engineers who examined Bat noted that many tombs naturally redirect weight through circular compression, reducing the likelihood of catastrophic collapse. In simple terms, the builders seemed to understand practical load distribution centuries before formal engineering mathematics existed. Excavations also revealed that Bat was not an isolated cemetery. Archaeologists discovered settlement remains, irrigation traces, workshops, and copper smelting evidence nearby. This transformed Bat from a mysterious burial ground into evidence of a highly organized Bronze Age society. Chemical analysis of copper artifacts found in Mesopotamia showed isotopic signatures matching ores from Oman. Ancient Mesopotamian texts even referred to a distant copper-producing land called Magan, which many historians believe was ancient Oman. This means Bat may have existed at the center of one of the oldest international trade systems in human history. That creates another mystery. How did a civilization in the mountains of Arabia establish trade connections with powers over 1,000 kilometers away? Imported pottery fragments from Mesopotamia and similarities with the Indus Valley civilization suggest maritime and overland trade routes linking Oman with some of the world's earliest urban civilizations. At a time when much of Arabia is often portrayed as sparsely populated tribal land, Bat may have been connected to a complex economic network, moving copper, ceramics, luxury goods, and possibly even technical knowledge across the ancient world. The logistics behind the necropolis remain deeply puzzling. Hundreds of tomb towers required an enormous labor force, planning system, and constant resource supply. Researchers estimate that constructing a single large tomb may have required moving dozens of tons of stone, yet the surrounding region lacks dense forests needed for large wooden cranes or rollers like those proposed for Egyptian construction methods. There is also limited evidence of wheeled transport during the early Nar period in Oman. Some archaeologists suggest the builders relied on massive coordinated human labor combined with sled systems, rope technology, and carefully prepared stone paths, but no definitive evidence has been found. Another unexplained feature is the extraordinary standardization of many tombs. Multiple structures across Bat share nearly identical proportions and layouts, despite being separated across wide distances. This implies not only planning, but some form of architectural tradition or measurement system. Similar standardization appears in civilizations such as Mohenjo-Daro, where uniform brick dimensions reflected centralized organization. Bat raises the possibility that Arabian Bronze Age societies possessed a level of technical administration far beyond earlier assumptions. The environmental mystery may be even more impressive than the architecture. Modern Oman receives extremely limited rainfall, often less than 100 millimeters annually in some regions. Sustaining permanent settlements, metal production, and large-scale construction in such conditions would have required advanced water management. Archaeologists discovered traces of ancient agricultural systems and seasonal water control strategies near Bat, suggesting inhabitants exploited underground water channels and seasonal runoff with remarkable efficiency. Some researchers believe early Arabian societies may have mastered desert adaptation techniques that were later lost or replaced over time. Yet despite all this sophistication, the civilization behind Bat eventually declined. By the late Bronze Age, many tomb towers were abandoned. Trade networks weakened, settlements shrank, and the monumental construction phase ended. There is no clear evidence of invasion or massive warfare. Climate studies indicate that increasing aridity may have disrupted agriculture and copper production. Others believe changing trade routes reduced Oman's importance in the Bronze Age economy, but the speed of the decline remains difficult to explain. A society capable of engineering large stone necropolises, organizing long-distance trade, and surviving extreme desert conditions seem to fade into history with surprisingly little trace. What do you think the people of Bat truly understood about engineering and construction 4,000 years ago? Was this simply a lost Bronze Age civilization, or evidence that ancient Arabia was far more advanced than history once believed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A frozen lake in southern Siberia, near the border of Mongolia, hides one of the strangest ruins ever discovered, Por-Bajin. Built more than 1,200 years ago on an isolated island surrounded by mountains and permafrost, the structure looks less like a nomadic fortress and more like a lost Chinese imperial palace. It was engineered with astonishing precision, constructed in one of the harshest climates on Earth, and then seemingly abandoned almost immediately after completion. Even today, archaeologists still cannot fully explain why it was built, how such advanced construction was possible in that location, or why a massive project requiring enormous manpower left behind almost no evidence of long-term human occupation. Por-Bajin, meaning clay house in the Tuvan language, sits in Lake Terracole at an elevation of roughly 1,300 meters above sea level. From above, the site resembles a perfectly organized military compound. The outer walls form a near-rectangular enclosure, measuring approximately 215 by 162 meters. That makes the complex comparable in size to several Roman frontier forts and larger than many medieval European castles. Yet, unlike typical Siberian fortifications, Por-Bajin was built using techniques strongly associated with Tang dynasty China. The mystery begins with the sheer improbability of its location. Southern Tuva is one of the coldest inhabited regions in Asia. Winter temperatures regularly fall below -40 degrees Celsius. The lake surrounding the island freezes solid for long periods each year, and even modern access to the site is difficult. Transporting thousands of tons of timber, clay, and construction material to the island in the 8th century would have been an extraordinary logistical operation. Archaeologists believe the builders may have exploited frozen winter surfaces to drag heavy materials across the ice, similar to theories surrounding the transport of megaliths in other ancient civilizations. But even that explanation raises another question. Why commit such enormous resources to an island with almost no agricultural or strategic value? Radiocarbon dating and dendrochronological analysis eventually connected the structure to the Uyghur Khaganate, one of the most powerful nomadic empires of the 8th century. Research published after excavations in the 2007 expedition suggested construction occurred around the year 757 during the reign of Bayanchur Khan. This dating became even more precise after scientists analyzed wood preserved in the permafrost and identified a spike in radiocarbon caused by the Miyake event of 775 CE, a cosmic radiation event recorded in tree rings worldwide. Very few archaeological sites in the world have been dated with such unusual astronomical precision, but the dating only deepened the puzzle. The Uyghurs were traditionally a mobile horse-based civilization dominating vast steppes through cavalry warfare and trade routes. Por-Bajin, however, looks nothing like a nomadic encampment. Its layout follows principles remarkably similar to Tang imperial architecture. The central courtyard, axial symmetry, compartmentalized rooms, and gate orientation strongly resemble palace complexes. From Chang'an, the capital of Tang, China, located more than 2,000 kilometers away, this has led some historians to believe Chinese architects or engineers may have directly participated in the project. Historical records mention diplomatic marriages between Uyghur rulers and Tang princesses. One theory suggests Por-Bajin could have been constructed for a royal bride familiar with Chinese court architecture. Another proposes it was intended as a Manichaean monastery after the Uyghurs adopted Manichaeism as a state religion in the 8th century. The architectural precision of the site is especially difficult to explain considering its environment. Por-Bajin was constructed primarily using rammed earth technology, a method in which damp soil is compressed layer by layer inside wooden molds until it hardens into dense structural walls. The same principle was used in sections of the Great Wall of China, some of which still survive after more than 2,000 years. Rammed earth requires careful control of moisture, pressure, and composition. In freezing climates, the engineering challenge becomes even greater because water trapped inside the structure can expand during freeze-thaw cycles and gradually destroy the walls. Yet substantial portions of Por-Bajin's outer walls survived for over 12 centuries despite being exposed to extreme Siberian winters. Some sections still stand several meters high. Geological studies suggest the builders may have reinforced foundations with timber frameworks underneath the compacted earth, distributing weight across unstable permafrost soils. Modern Arctic engineering often uses similar load distribution principles to prevent structures from sinking or cracking as frozen ground shifts seasonally. This raises an uncomfortable question for historians. How did 8th century builders possess enough environmental understanding to construct such a large complex in one of the harshest climates on Earth? Another mystery lies beneath the ruins themselves. Surveys using ground-penetrating radar and sediment analysis revealed that the island may once have been part of a different hydrological environment. Some researchers believe seismic activity altered the lake basin after construction. Southern Siberia is tectonically active, and evidence of ancient earthquakes has been found in nearby geological formations. Cracks discovered in portions of the foundation suggest the structure may have suffered damage shortly after completion. That possibility could explain why Por-Bajin appears strangely empty. Unlike major ancient settlements, the site contains surprisingly few artifacts. Archaeologists expected to find large quantities of domestic waste, tools, weapons, animal bones, ceramics, or evidence of prolonged habitation. Instead, discoveries were remarkably sparse. A few roof tiles, burnt wooden beams, fragments of pottery, and traces of heating systems were uncovered, but nothing indicating a thriving long-term community. This absence is one of the most unsettling aspects of the entire site. A project requiring such immense labor should have left behind the archaeological footprint of hundreds, possibly thousands of workers and residents. Instead, Por-Bajin feels almost abandoned from the beginning. Some experts believe the structure may never have been fully occupied at all. There is evidence of a major fire inside the complex. Burn patterns indicate that wooden structures collapsed inward, possibly during a catastrophic event. If an earthquake struck shortly after construction, the combination of structural instability and fire may have forced the site's abandonment within only a few years. In that scenario, Por-Bajin would represent one of history's largest failed megaprojects, a massive imperial experiment destroyed almost immediately after completion. But there are even stranger theories. Because of its geometric layout and isolated setting, some researchers proposed astronomical or ceremonial functions. The orientation of the main gate and internal divisions align closely with solar movement patterns during certain seasons. Although the evidence is not as strong as at sites like Stonehenge or Chaco Canyon, the possibility of ritual alignment remains debated. Others argue the fortress may have symbolized political authority rather than serving any practical military purpose, functioning more as an ideological monument visible across the lake. The comparison with other ancient mysteries becomes unavoidable. Like Machu Picchu, Por-Bajin was built in a geographically extreme environment requiring sophisticated logistics. Like the desert fortresses of the Silk Road, it demonstrates cultural fusion across enormous distances. And like Nan Madol in Micronesia, it sits isolated within water in a location that appears irrational for large-scale construction. Yet Por-Bajin differs from all of them in one critical way. It emerged from a nomadic empire not usually associated with monumental architecture on this scale. That contradiction may be the site's greatest mystery of all. So what do you think Por-Bajin really was? A lost palace, a sacred complex, or an ancient mega-project that failed almost immediately after it was built? Let us know your theory in the comments below. Buried beneath the deserts of southern Iran, near the Halil River in Kerman province, lies a civilization that should not have existed at the scale archaeologists discovered. Massive mud brick structures rising from one of the harshest environments on Earth, thousands of precision-carved stone artifacts produced almost like industrial exports, and traces of a possible writing system that may rival early Mesopotamia itself. Jiroft does not look like a forgotten Bronze Age settlement. It looks like the remains of a civilization that developed far faster than history expected. The site entered global attention after severe flooding along the Halil River in 2001 exposed ancient tombs and artifacts. Iranian archaeologist Youssef Majidzadeh later led major excavations at Konar Sandal, the central archaeological complex of Jiroft. What began as scattered looting quickly transformed into one of the most controversial archaeological discoveries of the modern era. The first shock was quantity. Archaeologists were not uncovering isolated royal treasures like those found in many Bronze Age tombs. They found thousands of chlorite vessels, bowls, boxes, and ceremonial objects carved with astonishing precision. Similar objects later appeared across Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, and even regions connected to the Indus Valley civilization, suggesting that Jiroft may have been part of a trade network spanning over 2,000 kilometers. The craftsmanship itself created immediate controversy. Many chlorite vessels contain deeply engraved geometric patterns, so symmetrical they almost resemble machine-guided carving. Repeating motifs wrap around curved surfaces with near-perfect consistency, while some carvings are only millimeters apart yet maintain equal spacing throughout the object. Even under modern replication attempts, archaeologists found that producing such uniformity with primitive Bronze Age tools is extraordinarily time-consuming. The problem becomes more serious when considering the tools available around the 3rd millennium BCE. Iron tools did not yet dominate the region, and bronze, especially early bronze alloys, is relatively soft compared to modern stoneworking materials. To create thousands of these objects, Jiroft artisans likely relied on advanced abrasive techniques using quartz sand and rotational drilling systems. Some researchers believe they may have used bow drill mechanisms far more sophisticated than previously assumed for that period. The scale resembles specialized manufacturing rather than isolated artistic production. At sites in Mesopotamia such as luxury goods were usually concentrated among elites. But at Jiroft, evidence suggests organized workshops capable of standardized mass production. This raises a disturbing historical possibility. Highly specialized industrial-style labor systems may have existed nearly 5,000 years ago. This remains one of Jiroft's greatest unsolved engineering mysteries. At Konar Sandal, archaeologists uncovered the remains of gigantic mud brick platforms and structures that may once have rivaled early monumental architecture elsewhere in the ancient Near East. Some estimates suggest the central mound originally rose over 13 meters high, with a massive rectangular base constructed almost entirely from mud bricks. At first glance, mud brick sounds primitive, but in reality, ancient mud brick engineering was incredibly complex. The mystery is not how these buildings were constructed, the mystery is how they survived. Southern Iran is one of the harshest environments imaginable for earthen architecture. Temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius. Flash floods strike seasonally, erosion rates are severe, and extreme thermal expansion gradually weakens unfired clay over time. Under such conditions, unprotected mud brick structures should rapidly collapse. Modern adobe buildings in comparable climates often require constant maintenance simply to survive a few decades. Yet traces of Jiroft's architecture endured for nearly 5 millennia. This suggests engineering knowledge far beyond what historians once assumed. Laboratory analysis of ancient mud bricks from Bronze Age Iran indicates carefully controlled mixtures of clay, silt, organic temper, and mineral inclusions. Some bricks may have contained plant fibers functioning similarly to modern reinforcement material, reducing cracking during expansion and contraction cycles. In certain samples, archaeologists detected unusually consistent density and composition, implying standardized production methods. The construction scale alone creates another impossible question. A monumental mud brick complex requires enormous logistical organization involving clay extraction, water transport, mixing stations, drying areas, workforce coordination, and long-term structural planning. To build a large platform, ancient workers may have needed hundreds of thousands of bricks. Even if one worker could produce 50 bricks per day, construction would still demand a labor force operating continuously for months or years. The comparison with other ancient sites makes Jiroft even stranger. At Mohenjo-Daro, standardized baked bricks allowed cities to survive seasonal flooding. In Sumer, ziggurats used layered mud brick cores protected by fired outer walls. But Jiroft existed in an environment with brutal desert exposure and violent hydrological shifts, making long-term preservation even more difficult. Some archaeologists believe the builders possessed advanced environmental knowledge, possibly understanding drainage gradients, moisture behavior, and thermal stability far better than expected for the early Bronze Age. Others argue that we are only seeing the surviving foundations of structures that were originally far more massive. If true, Jiroft may represent one of humanity's earliest large-scale experiments in monumental earthen engineering centuries before similar techniques became widespread across the ancient world. Another controversial discovery emerged from several inscribed tablets and artifacts found near Jiroft. Some symbols appear structurally distinct from Mesopotamian cuneiform. If confirmed as an independent writing system, these inscriptions could fundamentally challenge the traditional idea that writing emerged primarily in Sumer before spreading outward. This is why Jiroft remains academically explosive. For over a century, Mesopotamia was treated as the undisputed cradle of urban civilization, administration, and writing. But Jiroft hints at the possibility that multiple advanced centers developed simultaneously across the ancient Near East. Some inscriptions contain repeated geometric signs organized in systematic sequences. Linguists still debate whether they represent true writing, symbolic administration, or ritual notation. But even the possibility of an independent script would force historians to reconsider how quickly complex societies evolved during the Bronze Age. The reach of Jiroft extended far beyond Iran. Artifacts linked stylistically to the civilization have appeared across Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, Oman, and regions associated with the Indus civilization. This implies long-distance exchange routes operating at astonishing efficiency nearly 5,000 years ago. Maintaining such trade required organized caravans, navigational knowledge, resource management, diplomatic interaction, and systems of value exchange sophisticated enough to support international commerce. Bronze Age trade networks were not supposed to function at this level of complexity so early. Yet Jiroft suggests that interconnected economic systems may already have stretched across enormous parts of Asia, while Europe was still dominated by relatively small-scale societies. Perhaps the strangest part of Jiroft is not its technology, architecture, or trade. It is the silence. A civilization capable of monumental engineering, industrial-scale craftsmanship, and long-distance commerce should have left massive historical records. Yet Jiroft almost disappeared from human memory entirely. Some researchers suspect climate change altered the Halil River system, devastating agriculture and settlement stability. Others point toward regional collapse during the Bronze Age crisis, trade disruption, warfare, or gradual absorption into neighboring cultures. But none of these explanations fully account for the scale of disappearance. Do you think Jiroft was simply a forgotten Bronze Age civilization, or evidence that human history is far more advanced and incomplete than we realize? Share your thoughts in the comments below. plain of jars sits across the high plateaus of northern Laos like the remains of a forgotten industrial project. More than 2,000 massive stone jars are scattered across hills, valleys, and ridgelines. Some stand over 3 meters tall and weigh more than 14 tons. They were carved nearly 2,000 years ago in one of the most remote landscapes in Southeast Asia. No written records explain who built them. No surviving city has been linked directly to them. And despite decades of research, archaeologists still cannot fully explain how an ancient society managed to quarry, hollow, transport, and position thousands of giant stone vessels across mountainous terrain with such precision. The modern world learned about the Plain of Jars in the 1930s, when French archaeologist Madeleine Colani began systematic studies of the sites. Colani believed the jars were connected to ancient burial rituals after discovering human remains, beads, ceramics, and ash deposits around several jar fields. Her work revealed that the sites likely dated between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE. Later excavations using radiocarbon dating confirmed that many burial activities occurred during the Iron Age. But even from the beginning, the jars created a problem archaeologists could not solve. The burial theory explained some of the human remains found nearby, yet it failed to explain the enormous scale of construction. More than 90 separate jar sites have now been documented across Xiangkhouang province, many located on elevated ridges far from obvious population centers. The deeper researchers investigated, the more the site looked less like a cemetery and more like evidence of a highly organized engineering culture that had almost vanished from history. One of the greatest unsolved problems surrounding the Plain of Jars is transportation. Many jars were carved from sandstone, limestone, conglomerate rock, or granite sourced from quarries located several kilometers away. At Site 1, researchers identified unfinished jars near ancient quarry locations, proving that at least some jars were partially shaped before transport. The problem is scale. Some jars weigh between 6 and 14 tons. Moving a single object of that size across steep terrain would already be difficult even with modern equipment. Yet the ancient builders repeated this process thousands of times. Archaeologists estimate that dragging a 10-ton stone object without wheeled vehicles could require dozens or even hundreds of workers, depending on terrain conditions. Experimental archaeology involving megalith transport at sites like Stonehenge has shown that moving multi-ton stones with ropes, sledges, and wooden rollers is technically possible. But Stonehenge involved fewer than 100 major stones, while the Plain of Jars contains more than 2,000 carved stone vessels spread over hundreds of square kilometers. This creates a logistical puzzle similar to Easter Island and the transport of Moai statues, Nan Madol and its massive basalt construction, or Puma Punku and its precisely shaped stone blocks. But the Plain of Jars differs in one critical way. Most ancient megalithic sites focused on building monuments, walls, or temples. Here, an ancient society invested enormous labor into hollowing out gigantic containers instead. The most disturbing mystery of the Plain of Jars is not their size. It is the precision of the hollow interiors. Many jars display surprisingly consistent wall thickness. Their interiors are rounded smoothly enough that researchers believe the builders followed deliberate shaping techniques rather than random chipping. The bases are often flattened carefully to stabilize the structures on uneven terrain. Several jars also show nearly symmetrical openings despite being carved from extremely hard stone. Creating one large hollow chamber inside solid rock requires enormous technical control. The builders would have needed to manage fracture lines, prevent structural collapse, maintain balanced wall thickness, remove huge quantities of interior material, and smooth internal surfaces without cracking the vessel itself. The deeper mystery is that many jars do not preserve strong or obvious tool marks. Unlike Egyptian granite sarcophagi or Roman quarries, where chiseling patterns remain clearly visible, many jars at the Plain of Jars appear unusually smooth or heavily weathered. Researchers believe iron chisels and hammerstones were probably used, but the absence of repetitive cutting traces raises difficult questions about the exact carving process. Some archaeologists suspect the builders combined direct carving with thermal shock techniques known as fire setting. In ancient mining, workers heated rock with intense fire before cooling it rapidly with water, creating controlled fractures that weaken the stone for shaping. If similar methods were used here, the builders would have required advanced practical knowledge of heat stress, stone expansion, and fracture behavior centuries before formal engineering science existed. Experimental reconstructions suggest hollowing a single large jar using only Iron Age tools could require months of continuous labor, yet thousands exist across the plateau. That means the builders either possessed an extremely large organized workforce, surprisingly efficient carving methods, or generations of accumulated technical specialization. This is where the Plain of Jars becomes genuinely mysterious. The site suggests not primitive experimentation, but an industrial-scale stoneworking tradition operating with remarkable consistency. Even more unusual is the fact that many jars remain structurally stable after nearly 2,000 years of monsoon erosion, seismic activity, temperature fluctuations, and war damage. Some still stand upright despite weighing multiple tons while resting directly on exposed ground. The dominant theory remains funerary use. Excavations uncovered buried human bones, ceramic vessels, iron tools, glass beads, and cremation remains around several jar sites. Some archaeologists believe bodies were first placed inside the jars to decompose naturally before secondary burial rituals occurred nearby, a practice known as excarnation that existed in multiple ancient cultures. But the evidence remains incomplete. Many jars contain no human remains at all. Others vary dramatically in size and shape. Some appear unfinished, while many stone lids are missing entirely. A number of lids discovered nearby do not even fit perfectly onto surviving jars. This inconsistency has led to alternative theories suggesting the jars may have functioned as storage containers for rice, wine, or water, ritual vessels connected to ancient trade networks, territorial markers, or symbolic monuments tied to elite authority. The burial explanation solves only part of the mystery. It does not fully explain why an ancient society would invest enormous labor into producing thousands of giant stone vessels across mountain ridges over such a wide geographic area. The Plain of Jars may reveal something far larger than a burial tradition. It may point to the existence of a highly coordinated regional culture with engineering and labor capabilities far beyond what historians once assumed for Iron Age mainland Southeast Asia. Several jar sites occupy elevated strategic positions with wide visibility over valleys and movement corridors. Some researchers believe the sites were positioned along ancient trade routes connecting southern China, northern Vietnam, and the Mekong Basin. If true, the jars may have served not only ritual purposes but also political or territorial ones. Their visibility across landscapes could have symbolized authority in the same way pyramids, dolmens, or stone circles functioned elsewhere in the ancient world. The scale alone implies remarkable coordination. Quarrying stone, shaping jars, transporting them, and positioning them across remote landscapes would have required labor management, food supply systems, technical specialization, route planning, and long-term cultural continuity. In other words, the Plain of Jars hints at an organized civilization whose true complexity may no longer survive in written history. One reason the Plain of Jars remains poorly understood is because archaeology there was nearly halted for decades. During the Vietnam War era, Laos became one of the most heavily bombed countries in history. millions of cluster munitions were dropped across the region, including around the jar fields themselves. Even today, unexploded ordnance continues to restrict excavation in certain areas. This means large portions of the archaeological landscape remain unstudied. Entire jar fields may still lie hidden beneath vegetation or contaminated ground. Future excavations could dramatically change current theories about the site's age, function, and builders. Do you think the giant stone jars of Plain of Jars were truly built for burial rituals, or did they serve a much greater purpose that history has forgotten? Share your thoughts in the comments below.